This is the New Zealand Health and Safety Professionals Conference of 2019. The theme of this year's conference is breaking the norm. Just like from the very beginning of this group, when it was founded at the end of 2016, it's all about doing things differently. And this is very much on par with that objective. We're doing a live, free conference, webinar-based event, bringing in national and international keynote speakers for free for you guys who have expressed a want and a need to access more information and to also be given a greater sense of support within your broader health and safety community. So that is really the objective of today, is to give you some cutting edge information from some groundbreaking thought leaders within our profession, and also give you a sense of belonging and being part of something much bigger. So let's kick off. Some basic housekeeping. If you can, I really do recommend silencing your phone and perhaps trying to ignore some of those notifications, those bings and bongs from your email and from social media pages, and just allow yourself some time to absorb some of the information that you're going to take on board today. It is worth just bearing in mind that this is a 3-hour session. I do appreciate that we're all super time poor, particularly at this time of the year. If you do need to nip out and come back in, you can, okay? You just simply need to follow the instructions that you received in your email, and you'll be able to get back on board with us at any stage during this 3-hour session. So we are live from 9:30 to 12:30 p.m. today, and it is being also broadcast live on the NZHSP Facebook group page. Now, I really do warmly welcome you all to share this event using your own social media platforms, using the hashtag NZHSP. If you're on Instagram, if you're on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, take a photo of yourself listening to the conference for wherever you are, whether you're at your desktop or whether you are in the departure terminals of an airport. Take a quick pic of you tuning into this broadcast, stick it onto social media using that hashtag, and let's cause a bit of a storm. As mentioned, the broadcast is also being recorded. So not only is it being broadcast live on this webinar, not only is it being broadcast live on the Facebook NZHSP group, we're also going to be recording this session so that I can then go away and edit this and make it super sharp and super pretty for you all. And it will be shared freely on the NZHSP.co.nz website. For those that have visited the website in recent times, you'll be aware that there is actually a recording and a ton of slides and information packs being provided for free of charge from our really good friend Deanne Bowles. Deanne ran a pre-conference special last month on the power of conversations. Deanne is an expert in the neuroscience of safety. She's also a leadership expert and a Lego serious play facilitator. I've been fortunate enough to see Deanne speak and train in person. She joined us at last year's conference here in Christchurch, and she came to the table again this year. So a big thank you to Deanne. The recording of that session is available on the NZHSP website, as are the slides and a ton of information packs. So be sure, if you haven't already, grab a pen and paper, because there's going to be tons of information and links talked about during this presentation. Okay, so back to the conference. So today is all about breaking the norm. So quick question for you all, and I invite you all to use the chat box, the Zoom webinar chat box, to answer this. What comes to mind when you first think of health and safety? So jump onto the chat box in the corner of your screen there and simply type in what first springs to mind when you think health and safety. It may be high-vis vest, clipboards, checklists. Could be more holistic. It might be greater efficiencies in the workplace. That's really taking things to the next place. But you know, what image, what brand, what logo, what colours, what things spring to mind when you think health and safety? Cool. So we've got people working safely, structures, legal requirements, procedures, PPE, hazards, getting people home safely. Oh my gosh, I'm having trouble keeping up. Protecting others, looking after your workplace, people. Yes. planning, that everyone gets home safely. Love it. Home safe, great stuff. Lots of people as well. I love that stuff as well. Orange, yep, that's the color for me too. That springs to mind. Organizational culture, nice. Awesome, thanks guys. So what I did, gosh, it's still coming in, love it. Engagement, this, yeah, absolutely. This is engagement. Look how much engagement we're getting through an online webinar. How exciting. Continuous improvement for the next generation. Mindset, influencing people positively. People safety. Yes, love it. This is great. What I did last night, I was doing my usual. I was still tweaking and playing around with the slides, trying to get it in a shape that I was happy to present to you all today. Going home in one piece. Yes, love it. And so what I did is I inserted this question because I thought it was an interesting one. Because what I found after doing a quick Google search of environmental management, so I just quickly click back on my screen. I did a quick Google search for images of environmental management out of interest. And these are the types of images that cropped up within the first few selections. So we've got green, we've got globe, we've got ferns, we've got people taking care of the planet, all really super holistic, all quite friendly, quite warm and welcoming. Then I did a search for quality management. And here we've got teams working together. It looks like it's quite positive. Everyone's kind of pushing upwards, and it's all in quite neutral colours. And then on the right, we've got this tree that looks like it's striving, it's growing, it's developing, it's blossoming. Lots of really positive looking colours, and it's all looking quite connected and people orientated. Now, when I did a Google search for health and safety in images, so these are the first images that cropped up. Here we have someone in a suit wearing a tie, quite tightly up to the neck, a hard hat, a checklist. We've got some cogs, but the cogs aren't really turning or doing anything. And then on the right-hand side, we've got workplace safety, where we've got lots of hazardous signs, lots of yellow and blacks, danger, chemicals, fire, first aid, hard hat, stop, caution. And I guess the point for me is that I still believe that health and safety has got a long way to go when it comes to public relations and messaging. And I think from some experiences at conferences and events, sometimes we fall into the trap of still talking to this type of language, I believe. And I think for the greater benefit of our community, we need to start looking at how we can message the great work that we do in a better and more constructive way. And so I believe that one way in which we can do that and achieve that is by challenging the norm and asking whether there is a better way of getting that message and getting that training, getting that information out there. And so that leads us really neatly to why we are doing what we're doing here today. We are breaking that norm. We're getting away from the caution, stop, hazard signs. And we're asking the question, is there a better way of doing things? And I believe this is one way in which we can achieve that. Not only do you get to listen to the ramblings of a very energetic individual like myself, but you will also be able to hear from some of the masterminds where it comes to putting Safety 2 into practice. And also listening to international keynotes who have got really unique perspectives on some of the changes that we are now starting to witness here in New Zealand. So I believe that breaking the norm, what the New Zealand health and safety professionals is all about, is really going to help in the long run get us past that traditional PR problem that I think we still do have. And for anyone who has had that awkward moment around the barbecue on the weekend when you tell your newfound friends that you're involved in health and safety and having that awkward silence, I'd like to think in time it will be welcomed and it'll be great. You know, I love what you guys are doing. I appreciate the fact that health and safety is such a positive thing for our workplace and for our homes. So anyway, long story short, the New Zealand Health and Safety Professionals kicked off in December 2016. It was launched by me when I had just left a corporate role. I was working for a state-owned enterprise. Been there for about 1.5 years, and I made the decision to go back to consulting. At this time, it also gave me the opportunity to reflect on what several years ago, when I first got involved in health and safety, what would have made things easier for me? What kind of groups, what kind of networks would have made finding answers to those tricky questions and not so tricky questions that much easier for me? And so I experimented and I created the New Zealand Health and Safety Professionals group on LinkedIn, not thinking too much about it. But within a very short space of time, we had over 100 members, all networking and communicating on that group. Now, as a consultant, it gave me the opportunity to travel. And so I often used coffee shops as a second office or a home. And I used that opportunity to reach out to others in the regions that I happen to be in to connect over coffees. And it quickly turned into informal group meetings. Online and in person, the group began to grow. And by early 2018, we sent out a survey monkey to the LinkedIn group, which was then just shy of 200 members. And within a couple of weeks, we had a massive response. Almost 50% of the membership on LinkedIn responded to a series of questions that we wrote. And the message was loud and clear that there was a want and need for a conference with a difference, a conference with tangible learning experiences, getting bums out of seats, no death by PowerPoint experiences. And so by the end of 2018, we pulled off something that was quite spectacular. Here in Christchurch, we had over 100 delegates, all at the Chateau in the Park, where in the car park, we had an area designated for diggers, for mobile scaffolding, for mobile elevated work platforms. We had workshops managing and triaging people who were experiencing health and well-being issues in the workplace, how to triage and manage those suspected of being under the influence of drugs and alcohol in the workplace. We had international keynote speakers who flew over specifically for the event, all free of charge. The event itself was charged at a really ridiculous rate. We made it as accessible to our membership as we possibly could. And you can see by some of the feedback, it was an absolute ripper of an event. This year, we chose to do it online for various reasons, resourcing being one of them. The people that helped make this such a successful event have all been incredibly busy and successful this year, and it was just too much to ask of to pull it off again. Some of the keynote speakers that I will mention: Deanne Bowles, Blake Pelling from iAuditor, Tim Allred, who is the convener of the Australian Young Safety Professionals Group, Mark Kidd from Safe 365, Steph Serper, who has been a linchpin behind this group from Contract Construction, Mel Dunstan from Cook Brothers, and Anthony Saravallo from Sign, all had a massive part to play in the success of that event. Tons of backstory available within the NZHSP.co.nz website. And so today we find ourselves not only with a LinkedIn group, but also with a Facebook group. We have over 1,500 members now, online and face-to-face. The Facebook group itself has absolutely exploded. I'll rattle through some of these points quickly now, where we launched the Facebook group only in March this year. It now has well over 800 members on the page, an average of 25 new members per week. The group has barely needed any facilitation from me or from the other facilitators on the page. It has all been self-managed by you. The conversations have been incredible, to the point where we've now created something called units. So if you jump onto the Facebook group NZHSP, maybe if you're watching this from the live share, you'll see on the left-hand side there's something called units. Now what we've done is we've started to categorize the conversations that have really taken the hold and have generated great discussions and put them into units so that you can find them really easily. So from electronic reporting apps to higher education to incident investigations through to contractor management. If you've got a particular topic you're looking for an answer for, the units are there for you. All free, freely available. It's a bit like having a library of expert opinion and advice and up-to-the-minute links and content from your peers. We've also created a series of events, which I'll talk more about later on in this presentation. And also we've got the mentor and mentee program. Again, this is all through the Facebook page. It's all very fluid. There isn't a great deal of structure to it, but I believe, based on what we've seen from this group to date, it doesn't really need a great deal of structure because the people involved in this group, in this organization, whatever it is, have been incredible. And I know and I'm confident that the people that have put their hands up to become a mentor will be incredibly supportive and a great resource to those looking for mentorship. Be sure to check that out. Good morning, Steve. Awesome. Okay, so back to the conference today. I just very quickly want to acknowledge the sponsors of this event, without whom this wouldn't be possible. So these are our principal sponsors, which I'll be taking a moment in time to acknowledge and talk to in a little bit more detail. And we also have our general sponsors, whom again, we wouldn't be able to do this without their support and assistance. Very quickly, I just want to touch on each of these. The Building Networks is designed to build educated clients. It's New Zealand's leading authority on building compliance. They achieve this through online learning, interactive workshops, and customized training across New Zealand and beyond. In particular, with news events, with the fires in Auckland, these kind of items and this kind of information is critical for the health and safety community at large. Building Networks is an excellent resource when it comes to building rights and the Act. Definitely recommend checking them out. Obviously, Advanced Safety, that's my business. It's the health and safety consultancy, nationwide presence, international client base, with a growing range of expertise within our canon of resources. I'm incredibly proud of what Advanced Safety has achieved. Please be sure to check out our webpage, which is full of information, including radio shows and podcasts and tons of free information for you. Max People, I've had the pleasure of knowing Max for several years now. They're Christchurch's leading construction recruitment company, specialising in temporary labour hire, managed labour teams and carpentry subcontracting throughout civil, commercial and residential sectors. Fleetpin GPS, tracking for business on the move. They manage your team's vehicles and assets. It's a 100% New Zealand owned and operated business, providing local support, honest pricing and proven products. These guys are awesome. Please take the moment to check them out. If you need GPS tracking for your fleets, be sure to check out Fleetpin. And last is the Forklift Association. These guys are a vital part of the forklift industry, desperately trying to increase the knowledge and skills around forklifts and the safe work around them. Be sure to check out Forklift Association webpage. Okay, so we are roughly on schedule. The schedule today, 20 minutes of me rattling on and welcoming you all. We're now just on the brink of introducing our first keynote speaker, Jono Brent, CEO of Connetics, who will then be followed behind by Naomi Kemp, who is the Australian Institute Health and Safety Deputy Chair. We will be taking moments in time during this presentation to ensure that we explore questions and look at some of the key findings, some of the key themes that are cropped up during this presentation. And then we'll start to wrap up around 12:20. So before I introduce Jono, I'm just going to quickly hone in on KSI Limited. As mentioned before, this is a free event, so I'm just making sure that our principal sponsors, whom we could not do this without, get a little moment in the limelight. KSI, I've known for several years. They've been one of our clients. They specialize in exterior cladding and flashing products and solutions. They are at the forefront of the really high-end, high-caliber tiling and exterior cladding solutions. They also are not only backed by quality assurance and the ISO standards, they are also firmly behind the ISO 45001 Health and Safety Management Standard. They are a really great example of ISO 45001 being relevant to businesses of all shapes and sizes. It's not just for the large high-risk industries, it is for everyone. And these guys are a great example of that. Be sure to check KSI out. They're really good friends of mine, and I'm really grateful for their support for this conference. So without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Jono Brent. Jono is a CEO at Connetics and has been now for 9 years. Before then, he was the General Manager of Business Development at CityCare for over 7 years and a Senior Analyst at Corporate Finance at Deloitte. I was fortunate enough to watch Jono address the Canterbury Safety Charter in early 2017, about where he spoke about his take on Safety 2.0. Safety 2.0 is all about behavioural safety, with people safety at the very forefront of health and safety in practice. Now, he was an absolute stellar guest speaker at this particular conference put on by the Safety Charter, and I know he's got a great story to tell. It's the difference between theory and putting it into practice. So, ladies and gents, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you today, Jono Brent. Hey, Jono.
Very good, thank you.
Come on in. So, here's the seat. So, we're all set up and live.
All set to go. Excellent.
So all you need to do is just right to go forward.
Yes.
Left to go back. That's the main screen that you're
That I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay. And I will return just before 11.
Good as gold.
I should probably.
I might take the jacket off. It's very warm in here.
30 toast. Okay, ladies and gents, so enjoy. Thank you, Jono.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the invitation to speak to the conference today. It's an innovative way of doing it, and I congratulate the organiser of this for putting this on. It's a bit strange to speak into a computer as opposed to into an audience. I've presented a number of times to audiences in the past, which is always an enjoyable experience, but I'm a bit new to the idea of presenting at a webinar. So we'll bear with me and we'll see how this goes. Just to introduce myself before we go further, yes, so I'm Jono Brent. I've been the Chief Executive of Connetics Ltd in Christchurch. I'll tell you a bit more about Connetics in the next 10 minutes or so. I've been there for nearly 9 years. I started, the best way I can describe it is I started after the Christchurch earthquake in September 2010 and before the earthquake in February 2011. So I was, I'd only been there 2 or 3 weeks before the earthquake hit in February 2011. So I've learned an enormous amount. I've been in the sort of the construction industry for the last 15 years, although my original education is as a chartered accountant. So I suppose I fell into the management of construction and have been thoroughly enjoying it, and I struggle to see myself doing anything else at the moment in the future. So it's a great industry to be in, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. I've got a number of slides to work through with you today as we speak within my allotted time. There's probably too many. I probably struggled a bit to try and work out how to synthesize down the story that I wanted to talk to you about today. So what might occur is if I'm getting too close to the end of my time, I'll whiz through a few, but I've said to Matt that I'm more than happy that these slides get shared and more than happy that anyone contacts me directly. So Matt will share my contact details, etc., and you can contact me directly if there's any particular components. I certainly don't come in front of you today to purport to be a safety expert of any sort. As I say, my background is in first of all in finance, then in construction, business development, construction management. So my safety journey is a learning one, and so I know there's probably a lot of experts listening who will know a lot more than me that is about safety, etc. And most of my story today is a little bit about how at Connetics we've tried to do things differently as an organisation, of which safety is a benefactor of it, rather than me being here to tell you about how we've directly influenced safety. So I'll try and talk that. The other thing I'm not an expert in is PowerPoint slides. So the presentation of them is fairly boring, but you'll bear with me as we go through that. So I want to start a little bit about telling you, just before we get into it further, where our journey actually started. And it was really about 2014, 2015. So I've been Chief Executive of Connetics for about 3 or 4 years. And what those first 3 or 4 years were really what we'd call earthquake recovery. So we grew from about 200 staff to nearly 400. Most of that was in direct reaction to the earthquake response. As being a chief executive, I didn't have to worry too much about the future strategy because we were just really reacting to what was in front of us. It was an incredibly inspiring time, amazing seeing when communities come together and people put the community before themselves, how much you can achieve. Whilst I know it was just brutal for everyone that lived in it, worked in it, and had to deal with it, and all the insurance issues and things like that, it was probably the most inspiring time, in terms of working at Connetics. But what was the realisation is, as we started to come out of that, we started to look under the hood of our organisation to see what sort of organisation we actually were. And I'll tell you a bit more as we go about how we did that. But 2 things really slapped me in the face from some feedback we got. So we engaged some external assistance to try and really understand what our organisational culture was like and what it was like in terms of driving improvement, etc. And two things stuck out after a series of interviews. With this quote, is that one of our staff members told us that Connetics is a place where good ideas go to die. And another staff member said, if I had good ideas, I'd usually tell my dog because I'd get a better response. And those are incredibly challenging pieces of feedback to receive. So like all organisations, we were trumpeting how we needed to be innovative and drive improvement, and we needed to get better in service of the future and things like that. But underneath the hood of the organisation was just a culture of, you know, no matter what people had or what they wanted to contribute, it just wasn't getting out. And like I say, I've been there 3 or 4 years, and I thought I was doing a great job trying to get the organisation driven to more focus on improvement in the future, etc. and things like that. So this was incredibly confronting. So I suppose from that is where my story begins and what I'll talk through today. And so, and some of this, look, if you've heard me talk before, there'll be a bit of repetitiveness in this. I apologise for that. Our story is still emerging, and some of the things that we started, I can give you a little bit of feedback we've got to, etc. So, but before we talk about it, and that's why I really wanted to give you that context of what the start of our story, and I'll give you a bit more in that context about Connetics, because I think it's incredibly important that you understand that the frame of which we've looked at our improvement journey, because this won't be the same for every organisation, and that's because everyone has a different context. It'd be very easy for me to tell you a whole heap of stuff about the content of what we've got done, but not really give you enough context of how we've shaped our thinking. And so because context is so important, and it just can shape everything. And someone gave me a great example of context once. It was, so two people are going to work on this very same day, and they both get a flat tire. For one of them, they were going to work for a day that they didn't really want to be at. And they had things to do they didn't really want to do. It was going to be a boring day. The other person was excited because when they got to work, they had to pick something up, then they were getting on a plane to fly to another part of their business, and they were going to work on some improvement. They were really excited. So the same thing occurred, that there were two flat tires, but the context of which those two individuals looked at the flat tires gave them a completely different look at the content. So the content was the flat tire, the context shift. So I just want to say is that context is so vital, and you'll probably hear me talk a bit about that today, because I think that that is, if you want to start looking and diving into your journey about how to improve the way you drive safety and improvement and culture in your organisation, one of the most important things is to understand the context of which your current people see the world. And I'll talk more about that as we go. So a bit about Connetics' context. As I said, Connetics is where I'm the CEO, have been there for 9 years. So we're an electrical distribution contractor. So what that means is we look after or build and maintain the electricity distribution networks, which is from the moment it leaves the Transpower national grid to basically the power arriving at your front gate. We look after that network. So Orion, we predominantly work for Orion. We've got 300 staff based in Christchurch. We've got 30 people operating for Wellington Electricity doing a similar thing, and we've just recently in the process of establishing another team of 30 down in Central Otago working for the Aurora network. So they manage and own the network and have the interaction with the customer. We basically build it and maintain it. Connetics is it's got a reasonably low profile, because we like to think that if you don't know about us, then hopefully you haven't had any problems with your power. And so, yeah, so we're quite a low profile organisation that employs nearly 400 people across mainly Canterbury and Wellington and Central Otago. One thing that's very distinct, or the context about our organisation, is that we're basically a fully mobile workforce. So virtually none of our work happens in our controlled sites. We operate, Orion alone has about 100,000 sites where we could be on any one day. So we work in what we call uncontrolled environments, and because they're uncontrolled, we're at the mercy of the environment in which we work in. Could be traffic, could be weather, could be public access, those sorts of things. So it's quite different to operating what I'd call a more static workforce, which is within, say, a manufacturing environment, things like that. probably no less complicated, but it's just a different dynamic. We also, the electrical industry has been heavily prescribed in terms of safety acts for a very long time. So the Electrical Safety Act being in place since 1992, there's been a number of regulations. We have a licensing board, etc. There's lots of individual network requirements. So how we act safely or how we operate is not something that a lot of the time we have to actually determine. The rules are made for us to operate within. The big challenge is how do we take those rules, which are fairly detailed, often drafted and developed by engineers, and then having to be applied within a highly variable workforce with trade resource, etc. So one of the challenges being is that we're very well regulated. Is how do we actually get people to understand the regulation, etc., and how to apply it in practice? But we don't have to create a lot of those rules ourselves. As I said before, the starting point of our journey was really 2016. We had done, up until that point, done probably what everyone, the more traditional view of the world is that we were used to run engagement surveys, etc., and our scores gave us the sort of the 7 out of 10s and things like that often you get. But we never really got the content of the information or the detail of the information that really underpinned who we were as an organisational culture. So we asked an external organisation to come in, and they interviewed 25 people picked at random for a 1-hour phone call. And this is what they came back and sort of said, this is where we are actually at. And I asked them to be as blunt as they needed to be. And so we had these 5 things that were really our starting point, which is there was a passive engagement. People had been sort of stuck in that waiting to be told. And that was really about the feedback that went with that was a little bit of the, if I do what others tell me to do, then I sort of can't be wrong and held accountable, which is just something that has been generated over many years. We're the win-lose culture, a lot of what we call siloed behaviour, which is not unusual, where some teams would put their own goals ahead of the organisation as a whole. The one that hit me the hardest was the fact that people, because there was a lack of feedback and a little bit like that, I'd rather tell my dog because he might give me a better response, meant that there was a why bother culture. There was no point suggesting improvement unless because no one would listen. There was a lack of kinetic story really to work with that, and our information flow was fractured in that there was lots of information, but what was the source of the truth? I think the feedback is that people believe rumours and gossip over other information, things like that. So it's a bit full frontal to get this information smacked upon you, but it's better to start with the reality of where you're at, because you can, if you start down a journey with something to drive improvement, but you actually don't know your starting point, you can end up in sort of the wrong end point, and then get confused why your initiatives and things didn't work. A lot of the challenges that people blame the actual initiative, but actually what the problem was in the first place, we didn't understand the starting point of what we were working with. The other thing that's really full on for our industry is the fact that we are going to go through, like many industries, pretty significant change. In our industry, there's been probably over the last sort of 20, 25 years, a sort of an underinvestment in the assets required in terms of the spend required to keep pace with a growing New Zealand. And that's always a challenge. I think any infrastructure asset owner has the challenge of is that New Zealand had massive growth in the 50s and 60s, post-war. Most of the assets in our industry last about 50 to 60 years, which if you add those two together, you sort of fast forward to about 2020. So we really are at a point where there's going to be, there needs to be significant investment. There's been investment, but if it's been sufficient, because at the same time in that 60 years, our population has quadrupled. So that's one of the big challenges. There's been probably an underinvestment in capability over the last 20 odd years. New Zealand, our industry was created out of things like the New Zealand Electricity Department, where they used to spend vast amounts of money investing in the future. And for the last 20 years, probably we've underinvested in capability. Government is starting to impose regulatory challenges on our industry in terms of the amount people pay for power, etc., which is an ongoing debate as to what's the right way to value the investment in power, etc., and electricity. As with most industries, we're going to be subject to a significant shift in technology. technology that will can significantly benefit humanity, but also, of course, comes with challenges in terms of disruption to the way we provide services at the moment. And the last one is, as I said before, population growth demand. New Zealand's not getting any smaller. I read the other day by 2030 will be at near 5.5 million people, and the world's population will have grown by another billion. So, so population growth is going to put huge demand on our services. One of the exciting things for the electrical industry is the fact that electrical energy, and in particular New Zealand has a lot of renewable energy, is that's a huge opportunity to use those networks to actually decarbonise New Zealand. So we work for an industry that I think is going to grow significantly in terms of its use and volume, and so it's an exciting industry to be in. So that really gives us our context of the way we look at future resourcing is that the predicted demand for capable people in the industry is going in the opposite direction from the predicted supply. Now, this is a graph that doesn't have quantums associated with it. It's an interpretation of all the our analysis. But the problem being is that we're entering an age where a number of the people that are retiring from our industry are leaving with 30 to 40 years experience. And whilst we're doing as much as we can to increase the capacity, i.e. bring new people into our industry, they're not coming in with the same level of experience that what's leaving. And so what we're ending up with is a significant capability gap. And capability is one of the cornerstones of a good safety performance. So I think that whilst the challenge is a big one to overcome in terms of just getting the people, the big challenge that we have to deal with is that what's that going to cause in terms of the capability needed to meet the future requirements, and how's that capability gap going to manifest itself in terms of the way we perform in our safety, in our quality, in our financial timeliness, etc., etc. So we're not. I don't think we're alone in that industry makeup, and so but it is something that's going to hit us hard if we don't change the way we do work and change the way we develop people and change the way we interact and maximise what we've got out of our existing resources and grow new ones. So that sort of ends my sort of thing. So Connetics, it's a really exciting industry to be involved in. We've got a really bright future in terms of demand for our services, which is exciting. But we have a challenge where we have an aging workforce we're not replenishing at the speed we need to. And secondly, we're sitting on an organisational culture that really wasn't conducive to continuous improvement and the right culture for an organisation. And so I suppose, and I suppose when I looked at my journey through this, is that when I first started looking at how to improve our safety performance, I keep talking about the fact that we had good systems and processes, we've got trained people, we've invested heavily in all the right things. There must be something wrong, and I got trapped in this sort of cycle of, first of all, blaming the people. I'll openly admit that I was in that state of if you just didn't have people making stupid decisions, all of a sudden we'd be safe. I got trapped in that cycle. The other thing I got trapped in was the idea that safety culture was something different to the organisational culture. So we kept looking at initiatives at how you would improve your safety culture, and thinking that somehow the safety culture was a culture that was different to everything else in the organisation. So it wasn't until, and I wasn't even, it's one of those things that I wasn't even looking in the direction of how to improve this. But I went to a Safety Differently masterclass in Brisbane, which was run by Art of Work, and Daniel Commodore was the facilitator. Probably a number of you have probably struck Daniel either in that role or more recently as one of the chief innovation officer or something of those fancy titles at WorkSafe. And Daniel and I have become good friends, and we talk regularly about how we could improve the safety world. But we went to the Safety Differently masterclass in Brisbane, and I sat there for the day probably in the room surrounded by mostly people from the safety industry, so I was a bit like a fish out of water because I didn't really have the same level of expertise. And what struck me is that they weren't, what was being said had a full safety lens. So safety differently, safety two, all that had a full safety lens. But what struck me was actually you can't look at safety separately from the way you look at work. And you can't look at safety differently from the way you look at your entire organisation. So I started to, the journey examining what would that actually mean if we didn't look at a safety differently journey, but we looked at what we call the Connetics differently journey, which is using the basic principles of safety differently, i.e. people are the solution, learn from the positives, not the absence of negatives, and it's a ethical responsibility, not a bureaucratic accountability. That's the basic principles of safety differently. And how that might work if we actually applied that to a work context, and then shifting the idea that if you have good safety, you have good work, to the idea that if you have good work, you'll highly likely have good safety. So it's a contextual shift in the way we looked at this. So excuse me, I'm just going to drink water. So we started on a journey of creating a Connetics safety, Connetics differently plan from 2016. So it was about end of 2016. As I said, we were sort of guilty of the past of thinking about this differently. We really wanted to integrate this as a whole. And I'm sort of probably one of my big learnings is that, and I think we were lucky we went down this path, is that I'm now wondering whether you can actually do safety differently well, if people are exploring that, unless the entire organisation is looking at the philosophies for every aspect of your business. I think doing it in safety on its own would create benefit, there's no doubt about that, but would it really be able to engender this quantum of benefits that you need to really to try and generate, or could generate from this if you did it holistically for the organisation. Now that's a big challenge because it's a fundamental shift in the way you operate. And I'm going to talk through that a bit now, is that these are the sort of, I was sort of think back, and what I need you to know is that we didn't write this stuff down at the start. We didn't have a plan of how we do Connetics differently. This plan that looks like a plan here is actually retrospective. But now that we know how important these aspects are, this is why I thought it would be important that if I was going to leave with any messages today, to start on what I'd call the differently journey. These are the things that I think that you need to really tackle, and I'll try and deal with these in a few slides following. Is first of all, deciding how much impact you want to have. Do you want to make a small improvement or a fundamental shift? Those are really big things. Might seem a small difference, but it'll fundamentally change the way you look at differently. I got a great example of that a while ago. Is that we were listening. We got a guy by the name of Kevin Bigger. I don't know if you know Kevin Bigger, but I think he's on one of those intrepid New Zealand journeys where he's with a mate and they get dropped into random parts of New Zealand, and then they have to follow a path that was taken from an initial explorer or something like that. Anyway, he was a really inspirational guy, and he actually he won the Cross Atlantic rowing race. I think that's what it's called, North Atlantic. And when he spoke about it, it was one of those ones he entered when he was drunk one night, and then woke up the next morning and hoped that everyone else had forgotten that he had entered, but he stuck to it. Anyway, he said he went to a trainer, and the trainer asked him a very distinct question. He said, so you're entering the race, do you want to enter to win, or do you want to enter to cross the finish line? And he said, well, why do I have to decide that? And he said, well, from this day forward, whatever decision you make, will make a fundamental shift to everything we do going forward. And I think that's a little bit like what I mean by decide how much impact what you have. I want to talk about what sort of culture do you want. And I think I'm going to use a familiar template for that. How you're going to operate, you need to decide how your organisation is going to operate, what sort of leadership you'll need, how teams will work together at managing the dysfunction that may occur as a result between operational and support functions, i.e. like line management of operations and maybe the health and safety function, things like that. How you need to sort of have a plan for how you're going to address that in advance. And what are some of the things you can do to get started? So I'll just flick through those. And I'll go reasonably quickly, so apologies if I do. So The basic principles of safety differently, so just to go back if you haven't seen this before, the traditional view of safety is that the system is safe, accidents happen because people deviate from a well-prescribed plan, variability is a threat, and if it's a threat it needs to be controlled. Often we think people are a liability and therefore procedural compliance is mandatory, and the last thing is, is how can we change people? That's the bit that I was trapped in that. Safety differently takes a view of the system itself is not safe. Accidents happen when resources are not equal to the demands that are required. Variability is inevitable. Only people can adapt, accommodate and absorb to emerging threats, and you're left with the question, how can people be supported to adapt successfully? So it's just a different view. So we've used that differently philosophy across our entire organisation. So in terms of understanding the level of impact you want to make. And so we use this chart, which I've borrowed officially from some training we did a little while ago, and that's trying to understand what sort of level of impact. So level of impact of performance up the left-hand chart. So if your level of impact is you want predictable or BAU, then you can use existing levels of competency. If you want it to be a stretch performance, like as in 10% more than what you currently do, what the tendency is there, the capacity you'll need is to work harder and longer for what you do now. So you don't have to do anything different, you just have to dig deep and work harder than what you're doing at the moment. And that's a very valid way if you want to get small incremental. The third one, which is called blue sky, and actually when it gets someone like comes up with a blue sky idea, people struggle to relate to it, and actually what tends to happen is they don't actually go after it, and what happens is your performance ends up similar to what BAU would be, is in that people don't go after it. What we were going for is what we called a breakthrough in performance, which is possible but not predictable, and the thing there was it required new thinking and innovation, and we thought that where it needed new thinking and innovation was in the way we lead, the way we're managed and governed, how we work together, and how we mix our strengths and capabilities. So what we were saying is we didn't want to just get a stretch target, a small increase. We wanted to actually make a breakthrough in the performance that we had. We'd had pretty solid performance as an organisation, but to be able to move to the next level and even start to consider living in the agile world that's in front of us, we had to really make a breakthrough in the way we thought about stuff, how we innovated, how we worked as a team, etc. So that's really important. So it's really important that, and it's not to brush over this, is what is the magnitude of the impact that you're trying to create? And none of them are wrong. It's just that that you just need to be really clear about that, because that will determine then how you go about it. Which actually leads the same thing into the, like what sort of culture you want. And like I say, to make it align to possibly what you may have seen before, I think this is the Hudson model, I think it's called, is that, what sort of culture do you want for your organisation? So like I say, I've used the safety one just to give you an example. But, of course, we're likely all going to put a circle around the green one at the top. It's sort of like it's not allowed not to put that there. It's really important, but realising that the steps from the other colours to the green are not necessarily a linear step. Sometimes that when you get to the yellow, which is proactive, which is you might consider good, if you want to be great, one of the things you've got to do is break apart good to get to great. And that's kind of a challenging headspace to deal with, because it may feel like you have to go backwards to go forwards, which is quite common if in a financial sense. So in a financial sense, probably everybody's heard of sort of hockey stick growth. You have to invest and dig in, and then you might have a period where your costs are down, etc., or your profits are down, and then you need to, but then after a while you get the growth that comes from that. That's pretty tough to do in a safety world, because what does that downward trend actually mean? Like, obviously no one wants to hurt anybody or worse. So, we probably stick more closely in the safety space to the tried and true, because breaking it apart to look at the world differently might cause issues in the short term. So, so I truly understand why that is sometimes difficult. But what I'm saying here, the main point of that is that whilst we all want to be in the green, the path towards that is not linear. And I think that's why we need to really have a look at the way we work or the way we operate. So what we then went from Connetics is looking at the it was really important for us to understand how we were going to work. And to be clear, I'm not a massive fan of values statements, as in values that end up on the walls, one word type values. I just declare that I'm not a massive fan of them. I'd rather work on a really clear set of what we call organisational or operating model design principles. So these are, and what we needed to do was not only make them about the statement, but how practically they'd be applied in the business. And so we put them in a distinct order, in that we needed our people to be the solution rather than a variable to be controlled. So that's very much a differently principle. But the key thing there is that they needed to be enabled to be the solution, not just here are the keys, do what you like, which is what a lot of people probably confront when they are working on people are the solution as a theory. They have to be enabled to be the solution. People also need to be enabled to collaborate and develop the best solutions in a given context. So one of the things there is that lots of organisations, and one of them wants to talk about how do we want our people to collaborate, but actually throwing people in the room and just telling them to collaborate doesn't usually have a good ending, because what tends to happen is that there's a high level of confusion between collaboration and consensus. And consensus often ends up in committee management decisions, which are not usually fast and are usually trying to make everyone happy, etc. So you need, actually, if you want people to collaborate, you actually have to enable them to collaborate by offering things like expert facilitation, really good goal setting, reporting, measurement, that sort of stuff. So that doesn't come easily. So people have to be enabled to collaborate. Thirdly, people have to be enabled to experiment and learn safely. Failure has to be acceptable in an organisation if you want to be able to experiment and innovate. So often you hear we're an innovative company but just don't fail. Those words aren't exactly used, but I think it's a common thing that goes on, is that we don't give enough people permission to create and learn safely. Obviously with safety in mind, we want people to learn safely, not learn through accidents, etc. Number 4, people are enabled to adapt and perform quickly in an ever-changing and constantly changing ambiguous environment. So speed of decision-making, those sort of things is absolutely important if we wanted to change the way we operate. And lastly, and probably the most important of all, is that everything has to be transparent in the organisation. And so those are transparency across all things. Honesty, openness, those is absolutely critical if you want any of those other 4 to be ingrained. So I won't go through what this means practically, because that's what it means practically to us at Connetics, but those are our design principles. It's really important for us to work. So this is what we thought would get us to where we wanted. What we thought won't get us there is our traditional view of the way we've operated in the past. So we knew that traditionally we relied on hierarchy and organisational structure, and what we would tend to do is if the structure wasn't right, we'd just reorganise and just keep reorganising, hoping that one day we'd come up with some sort of magical organisational structure that would then work. People only working to accountabilities. I have a job description, and that's all I do. That's not going to be part of a future that supports our way of working. People have the idea of people having one job and one team with one manager. People working areas that they don't actually like. Using formal bureaucratic change processes and people fearing experimentation. So and dangerously, if you ignore behaviour, lots of people perform well, but is their behaviour aligned to what you're trying to achieve? So that traditional shift, and I actually saw this diagram on Matt's earlier slides. So we're moving from the traditional view of the past that we isolate and we work in a team, and that team's who we care about. And yes, we do work for an organisation we care about, but actually as long as my team is successful, I can't be held accountable for what goes on in the rest of the team, to the idea of the future being that it's more of a grid of networks. So none of that is new. The challenge being is how would we even consider operating in that space? And one of the things that really was evident to us in terms of the way we operated and really distinctly operated in safety is we were operating in the left-hand box of those two, and we needed to shift to the right. And the only way to do that was to shift the way we lead. So we had to, you can't, I think we, as chief executives, are guilty of looking and saying we want the organisation to operate in the right-hand design, That's what we aspire to, but we run the business like the left-hand side. And they don't actually mix. So we have to think about it. So we set up a path of shifting our leadership approach, and particularly shifting the way we drive improvement, or drive the organisation as a whole. But you see it more frequently in improvement. So I'll give you 3 diagrams to try and explain our shift in leadership. First of all, is that as a leader, you are bombarded with things that people want to see improve. Teams, families and friends, my manager, clients, even your own personal desire to see. So you are, as a leader, and we all are leaders. I'm not talking about a hierarchical leader. I'm talking about someone who leads others of any sort, whether by position, title or not. That's the role that you find yourself in. Now, the traditional response to that, and what we call hero leadership, is that the leader needs to do something. The leader will sit down and take on accountability for doing all the thinking, make a plan. The leader will then tell their people what's going to happen, and the initial result, the results could be a good decision. I'm not saying that there aren't leaders out there that aren't making good decisions. People will improve, people will commit, people will improve, and the leader will get credit. If it's a bad decision, though, which sometimes also occurs, bad decision, people don't improve, no improvement in performance, and what is left is blame. Now, I presented this to some of my field crews, and the feedback was that Connetics originally would have won a medal for our ability to be hero leaders. We were at the top of our class of hero leadership. And that's why so much was built in there about that. Why bother? Because no one listens, or someone else just makes all the decisions for us. We're just going to wait to be told. So that was our model. And what we wanted to shift to was the idea of host leadership, which is the leader. The first thing is realize this doesn't have to have the solution, but know he needs to do something. Their role is not to actually do anything, but to establish the compelling future they're committed to, as in what sort of impact do they want to have. The leader's job is to enroll others, make sure they understand the context, and collectively commit to a future. This is all before you start taking action. Then it's about, we design a team, we get a team together, which could be, in our organisation, could be field staff, could be office staff. We have expert facilitators that we've employed to help us with this, and they design the solution. Now, the 2 results are, if it's a good solution, as it was with the other one, everyone commits and everyone shares in the success. The magic is if it didn't work out as expected, because people were involved in the creation, they're still committed to the outcome and usually get on board and try again. So it's just a totally different shift in leadership. The interesting thing is as a leader, when you actually sit down and adopt the first, that the leader doesn't have all the solutions but knows he needs to do something, a huge amount of weight comes off your shoulders, because all of a sudden now you're not the font of all knowledge. You can actually go, my job is to go, what are we actually trying to achieve, and who do I need around me to succeed? And you don't have to worry about being an imposter anymore or anything like that. It actually is freeing to actually go, I know I need to do something, but I don't have all the answers, and I'll work with my people to achieve it. So shifting from hero to host is shifting from people from a variable that needs to be controlled to people that are the solution to an organisation's challenges. You've got to rely on instructions and directions to enrol in commitment through context and outcomes, working to accountabilities as opposed to taking full responsibility. Privacy, as in, I need to know all this myself, and I'm going to lock it down to transparency and vulnerability. And a hero leader changes through formal plans, and a host leader looks more to trust and experimentation. So that's a shift. Now, don't get me wrong, we have still got some serious work to do to get ourselves into the world of being a fully host leader and not end up in committee making decisions and all those sorts of things. We're on a journey. But you've got to, if you want to deal with this, or if you want to tackle, my view is my view of the only way to shift forward is to really look at how you're leading people. You can't ask people to be the solutions if you're going to lead them as if they need a variable that need to be controlled. So it's just shifting from the rhetoric of what we want as leadership to the actual action. Now, there's a possibility that you smash into some challenges though when doing this, and a little bit, as we call it, the downward spiral of dysfunction, which is what can occur under probably what I'd call more hero leadership style, which is that And I'll use business unit support functions. What I mean by a business unit might be an operational unit for us. It's like one of the contracting teams. Support function might be, in our instance, could be IT, could be finance, could be HR, could be health and safety. And what happens if they don't host each other to define effective solutions, i.e. one of them designs it and tries to impose it on the other. They're designing solutions in isolation, and which are often ineffective. And for example, what that might mean is that somebody we use safety as an example, designs a best practice solution, but that best practice doesn't actually fit the operational requirements. So it's not a best fit. So we've shifted our thinking to best practice to best fit. Best fit may not always be best practice, and that's a challenge sometimes, but if you design them in isolation and they're ineffective, then it's not going to work anyway. Business unit support functions then don't take responsibility for all the outcomes, i.e. it's not my design, it's yours, so we're not responsible for it. There's lots of conflict, frustration, avoidance and blame, often resulting in the demand for more compliance and further avoidance, and what ends up is that there is some sort of more senior management intervention forcing hero leadership to return. So the concept being is that host leadership gives the ability right at the start to get the right people around the table to design best fit solutions to stop the spiral of dysfunction, which is what we see, or we're seeing so often, and sometimes still do. So like I say, I'm not standing in front of you today suggesting that I have this, we have this all sorted, but that's where we're targeting. The other one is really looking at going, where you might smack into issues is that if anyone's ever done any work associated with the way teams work together, I highly recommend research into Patrick Lencioni. Patrick Lencioni does some amazing work on teamwork. I think he's got a book, something about dysfunctional teams. I can't remember the exact title, but he looks at this and going, the triangle of team performance, and we've used this a lot for ours, in that most of the time in the past we've probably looked at this triangle from the top down, demand results and expect accountability, and then you generate commitment and there might be some conflict, whereas actually the way to look at this is the complete opposite, that you've got to look at this from the bottom up, is that you can't get results unless you've got, you need trust. Trust is the underpinning value or perspective of being able to have good conflict. You can't have good conflict unless you actually trust each other, and you trust each other's the way that we look at the world. We're vulnerable with each other, we say when we don't know, we apologise, those sort of things. You can't get commitment unless you've actually had good conflict, because if you haven't had good conflict, what tends to happen is that people in the room are left with unresolved conflict and they are not committed, etc., and you can't have accountability. So I won't delve into it much, but I would highly recommend some research into that area. Some practical things that we have done. So what we have done, so I'm just going to grab a note so I can speak knowledgeably about this, is that the key really is that, as I said before, collaboration is about getting people together with different views of the world, but who are committed and aligned to the successful and agreed outcome. So it's not about going into it going, I want to get my bit, and if I don't get my bit, I'm taking my bat and ball and going home, etc. It's about true collaboration to work through the process of finding a successful outcome for the whole of Connetics. But as I said before, you can't just put people in a room and ask them to collaborate without either some training, some facilitation, some support, giving them ownership, giving them full ownership, and the last one, probably the most important one, is giving them permission to act. So we've had a number of here, and these are just 3 examples. So we used what we called the Big 3. The Big 3 was about redesigning or re-engineering our processes for all of our operational part of our activity, including integrating all of our safety processes into our operational workflow. The reason it was called Big 3 is there was 3 big projects, and no one was smart enough to remember all 3, so we just called them the Big 3, and it became colloquially termed as our project for re-engineering the process. We created the work improvement team, which was an environment or a vehicle for people from all aspects of the organisation to be able to identify, prioritise, and then deliver excuse me, micro improvements across the organisation. So they have mandate to be able to decide on what's going to work, and develop budgets, plans, and then to deliver a whole series of improvements across the business. A lot of them are done without my knowledge at all, and they have done some fantastic stuff. They're an amazing sounding board for the organisation in terms of if we want to try an improvement for the whole organisation, we use them as our sounding board to etc. And so it's a highly empowered team called the Work Improvement Team. And they work highly interrelated with the traditional health and safety committee, etc. And the collective insights is things like when we've had some pretty serious incidents, etc. Rather than just the standard investigation, ICAM investigation, we do a collective insights where we get a whole series of people who also do the same work as those that had the incident, and we look at all the insights into how things could have happened, how practical drift might have occurred, etc., etc. So those are just some practical examples, and I can certainly give you more directly if anyone wants to contact me directly to talk about those or come and see them in action. More than happy. We've had to host a few organisations to do that. So what we're starting to see, I'll rush through these because they're there, is that people are starting to ask for more advice. Leaders seem to be willing to take on more because they realise they don't have to have all the answers. So they're now role as they can host more rather than have to hero more, if that's the best way to do it. I think the bit that's probably the most important thing to me is people are starting to become more human, which is fantastic. The humanness is starting to return to our organisation. However, you do sometimes smack into a couple of things, and that is that the fear of the unknown and the fear of that people, even though they know it might not be successful at the moment, that the challenge is that they know how to do that and sometimes get stuck living with disappointment as long as it's familiar and safe. And the other thing that probably, and this is a concept that I encourage you to use, is that a lot of people are left in a state where they feel like they can't say what they actually think. And if they can't say what they actually think, their ability to get truly committed is very difficult. So this is just a great picture I got from a training course once that said, the yellow boxes is what we often say in a meeting when our manager or someone in authority comes up with a brand new spanking idea, and the grey boxes are what we possibly might be thinking. And the challenge being there is that we are, in that we are left operating probably more consistent with the grey boxes than we are with the what we actually say out loud. So if people don't feel safe to be able to release their background conversations, then they're unlikely to get fully committed. Now, Matt's just come into the room. Am I getting close to the end of my time, Matt?
I think so.
Oh, I could have talked for hours. Can I just point out, Matt, because this is on the slides.
Yes.
The next few slides are really going to be, I was going to talk a little bit about the difference between complicated and complex systems. Yep. I encourage everyone just to read that article link. It's an article, if you haven't ever gotten onto the Safety Differently website, if you're curious about safety, I would highly encourage you to go and read the article about complicated versus complex. I just copied a few things in there. I think what we try and do, Matt, is when we're looking at safety systems, we try and put them in the complicated box, whereas actually we've got to embrace complexity. Yep. So complicated might be your car engine. If a part of it breaks, you fix that part and the engine goes. But a complex is when you start adding in all the human dynamics and variability. Yep. And what we try and do a lot of the time is when we try and drive investigative work is we try and break it down into a number of fixes, thinking that if we fix those components, all of a sudden the components will work together again. Yep. But I think the quote that I liked out of this article the most was this one here, is to manage a system effectively, you might focus on the interaction of the parts rather than their behaviour taken separately. And I think that's what sometimes we find in our safety investigation process. We try and get our investigation down to a series of broken parts, and we end up with this world of, if we have another process, we do some training, and we buy a new tool, we're all of a sudden safe again, and that's unlikely to be the outcome. So just to finish, as I said before, our people are the solution, and the only way to make those people a solution is that through collaboration they'll design the best solution. So that's the end of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jono.
That's okay.
I know there has been one or two questions come through.
Oh, has there? Okay.
So I'm just going to see if I can find that.
Okay.
Okay. And some of you may already be able to see Naomi in the background there. Hi, Naomi.
Hi, Naomi.
Who is our next amazing, fantastic keynote speaker. However,
yes.
Before we meet Naomi, I just wanted to table some questions. So we've got Pip Noyon, who is part of the support team here. She's stepped in.
Yep.
And she's wondering, how is the journey towards enabling your people going? What are some of the roadblocks that you faced?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, and it's been what I'd call not a smooth journey, because we are fundamentally shifting the way people view their role as a leader of an organisation, what their role is as an employee or staff member of the organisation, and it's been rocky. The roadblocks we mainly face is helping people to collaborate differently. I think there's another question here which I think I could probably tie into is that can you use host leadership process for all decisions? And I think actually what we try to do is probably, yes, use it for all decisions, and I think that's a mistake. You've got to look at if in my slides you'll see a thing there called the Connetics framework. When it comes to things like simple decision making, you don't necessarily always need to have collaborative thinking, host leadership. When it comes to things like complex or even chaotic decision making, yes, either the only solution is host leadership. And I can't remember. There's a Swiss or a Swedish company that talk about collaborative hierarchy, and I'm going to do a bit more exploration into that, which is when to be collaborative and when to use hierarchical decision making. So I think our rockiness or roadblocks, as put with the question was, is we probably try to put everything into the banner of this, whereas actually I'd look at it and go, is the problem simple or complicated? You can probably use traditional decision making. If it's complex or chaotic, then I think there's no other choice but to use host leadership type decision making. Yep.
Love it. Now I'm going to be really sneaky and sneak in a question myself.
Oh, sure.
I guess the reason why this group was formed in the first place was for a peer group to bounce ideas off one another to feel part of a community. Now, from what you've talked about and from what I know of you from the past, Jono, it's very clear that you are at the forefront and potentially kind of stand among only a few others within the business leadership. So who does Jono Brent turn to for support?
That's a good question. And look, it's a lot of people. There's a lot of people certainly desiring to think this way, Matt. It's not like, it's more around is how do you start, because by starting it might actually go bad for a little while. And actually a lot of people go, this is the interesting challenge, is after using the safety differently principles for 6 months, people go, all of a sudden my stats are worse. So it must be safety differently that's driving this being wrong. But actually what you're doing, you're opening up a pathway towards that information that previously might have been hid within the organisation. So I certainly challenge you to stay the course. So a lot of the time I look internationally. So because New Zealand, the thinking that's been in place here is we're a catch up, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So in New Zealand, the best person to talk to is Daniel Hamador, and it works out, and Daniel will be open arms to any conversation you want to have about safety innovation. There's some amazing companies in Australia like Lang O'Rourke, Art of Work, who I'm associated with, a number of other entities. BHP is huge. BHP is one of the largest companies in Australia, and it's trying to endeavour to take safety different principles throughout its organisation, or even further into the UK, etc. So, and I've found without doubt that anyone that's in this journey, because as you say, you feel a bit alone. If someone else rings you up and says, do you want to have a talk about it, then they can't give you enough time. There's so much time they want to give you because they just want to engage. And I'd be more than happy to share some of the context of the people that have helped me, because I'm absolutely confident they'll help anyone as well. So yeah.
Fantastic.
So as I say, anything in this, Matt, totally shared, and please feel free to share my contacts. I'm not an expert in this. I'm just inquiring the fact that I think the way we've been doing it in the past fundamentally isn't going to get us to the place we all desire. So that's where I sit back.
What a brilliant way to finish. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Very good. Appreciate that. I'll leave you. And to everyone there, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Excellent.
Poor Jono has been sitting in this small wee box that I put him in.
Hot.
It is extremely hot in here, so thank you so much, Jono. What a brilliant presentation. Okay, so I'm just going to take us through some of these amazing slides. I'll just reduce that. We have just taken some Q&A and feedback with Jono. Now we are back to the schedule of Breaking the Norm, the NZHSP Conference 2019. As you can see on the screen, we have been joined by Naomi. I'm just going to very quickly do a recognition of some of our partners and sponsors who have made all of this possible.
So, as mentioned previously, these are some of our principal sponsors. We have KSI that I mentioned previously with you. They are the exterior cladding experts here in New Zealand. Clever Medkits. These guys actually sponsored the pre-conference event with Naomi, Deanne Bowles from Instinct Workplace Solutions. So I'm just catching my thoughts. That pre-conference presentation is available on the NZHSP.co.nz website. We've also got Safe365 Sign, Learn About, and Checkmate. Now, I just wanted to hone in very quickly on our friends at Safe365. Now, I've been fortunate to have been following Safe365's journey since the very beginning. They happened to go live and hit the market pretty much the same time as I set up Advanced Safety. Safe365 reached out to me wanting to see if I wanted to explore what it was they were doing. And when I saw the product, I realized that what Safe365 has fundamentally done for the health and safety consulting world is very much like what Xero accounting software did for the accounting world. It is a one-stop solution for health and safety assessment, diagnosis, road mapping your improvements, and actually providing some of the solutions in which you need to take in order to make those improvements. This is all done through a really beautiful and very simple dashboarding experience. These guys have basically made health and safety incredibly simple. And so as a user and a partner of Safe365, I can't recommend it enough for businesses of all shapes and sizes. It's related to ISO 45001, the International Health and Safety Management Standard. However, as I mentioned previously, the ISO 45001 has this label that it is purely for large and high-risk businesses. I completely disagree with that. I believe it's for all shapes and sizes, and the Safe365 tool has very much demonstrated that. The chart on the bottom left there is a broad brush of all of the various industries that are currently using Safe365, over 2,500 industries internationally. You get a benchmark report of where your industry is in terms of the scoring assessment that you get. And the benchmark also tells you the types of injuries and statistics that are taking place within your industry. It's really a useful tool at the governance level, but also at the operational level. Safe365 provides a mobile reporting app for all of your operational staff, all part of the annual or monthly subscription, up to 100 users at a time. The subscription is ridiculously cheap. And last but not least, they have also just been brought on with the Shop Care initiative, which is one of 5 of the initiatives adopted or accepted by the ACC's Workplace Injury Prevention Grant Scheme. Long story short, Safe365 is going to be used across the entire supply chain of the retail and manufacturing sector. Really amazing. Again, it just goes to show that ISO 45001 is not just for large, high-risk enterprises. They're doing a very special deal for this conference. So if you want to check out Safe365 for yourself, you can do a free 20-day trial simply by jumping onto the Safe365 website. You will at some stage be invited to enter a code. These are the 2 codes that are specific for this conference. If you want to do the annual subscription, which is $9.99 per year, or the monthly subscription of $99 per year, enter these codes and that will give you a further 5% discount. It gives you everything I've just shown you, the 100 app users, the dashboarding, the assessment, and all of the tools to make those improvements. Safe365 is really super amazing and awesome. Okay, rattling on. So, we are now roughly halfway through this conference, breaking the norm. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is all about challenging the status quo, doing things differently. New Zealand Health and Safety Professionals was very much set up on that mindset, really, looking to do things differently, reaching out and trying to establish relationships, not only within the local areas, but nationally and also internationally. So over time, the group has made friends, not only in New Zealand, but Australia and beyond. We've also got people tuning in from the UK, North America, Canada, Europe, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and now we're going to be joined by the most amazing character, Naomi Kemp. Naomi Kemp and I had the chance to meet a couple of years ago in Melbourne. She's a real legend. Naomi Kemp, oh, I did have your background all written there, but it's all disappeared, Naomi, is a consultant with Safe Expectations. She's also a keynote speaker, not only in Australia, but across the globe, and happens to be the Australian Institute of Health and Safety Deputy Chair. She is a health and safety superstar, and she will be talking to us today about her thoughts on enforced undertakings, something that is relatively new to us here in New Zealand. With the introduction of the Health and Safety at Work Act, enforceable undertakings has been something that's been used more and more, and over time has generated quite a lot of discussion and debate as to whether it's something of value or not. Now, Naomi's got lots to say about this, so hopefully, Naomi, you can hear me.
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Hi, Naomi. Yes, I can. Now, hopefully at your end, is there an option to take control of this presentation? And if not, I will have a play from this end.
You might need to just hand it over to me.
Here we go. Aha. I'm going to make you a host. Here we go. And by amazing technology, I think you now have host control.
Excellent. Cool. Can you see that? How are we going? Have you got the
cool.
full screen?
Awesome.
Cool. Right, yeah. Well, thank you for this opportunity, Matt. It's kind of cool to be sitting down, giving a keynote with my dog outside the door. So apologies if there's some serious barking that occurs during this. And hello to everyone out there in cyber world. You'll notice there were some poll questions. So the idea is to make it a little bit more interactive today. So you can answer the questions as we go along. I have 4 problems that I talk about today. So 4 of the questions relate to those 4 problems. Or if you want, if I keep you so enthralled, you can just complete the poll at the end. How's that sound?
Sounds awesome.
Oh, cool, let's go. All right, I want to start with the first question. Have you ever thought a lot about how we deal with things in safety is in the negative? That if you don't abide by a policy, you will be reprimanded. If you deviate from a procedure, you will be injured. If you don't fulfill your duty of care, you will be prosecuted. If someone is seriously injured, you will be penalised. You will be denounced, and if someone dies, you will go to jail. Our systems lay out rules and responsibilities and controls and how we monitor them. It's almost like you have no choice. It's either this way or it's the highway. And if you choose the highway, then I'm sorry to say, mate, but you might be on the highway to hell. And it's there you will be punished. So what's crazy is that we consider this acceptable, that it's an inherent belief that people should be sufficiently punished, and that will deter everyone else from veering down that designated path. So today I want to talk a little bit more broadly about how we can transform enforcement, about stopping and considering breaking the norm when it comes to addressing non-compliant actions and behaviour, thinking about how we can advance from relying on punishment and deterrence and being more collaborative and restorative. So I'm going to talk about 4 problems that I see with the punitive approach. And I want to discuss this idea how we can better influence behaviour and decision making. Because really that's what we do, isn't it? We influence, we negotiate, we persuade. So I want you to think about how we can influence better than just through the punitive means. How we can create greater awareness, we can shape desires, build knowledge, incite action, and reinforce it with not quite such a big safety stick. Cool. Well, I'll give my introduction for Matt instead. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Naomi Kemp, not spelt the New Zealand way that Matt has there on the screen. I'm the founder of Safe Expectations, which is a health and safety strategy business So naturally, I specialise in developing, facilitating and managing enforceable undertakings. But this keynote is about sharing with you my learnings on restorative practice over my career so far. From working with numerous of companies to successfully have an enforceable undertaking accepted, helping businesses put health and safety strategies in place to create just culture, and more recently spending time in Vancouver with WorkSafe BC, where we were workshopping how to enforce safety differently from a regulatory approach. So you will guess by the end of this, or you will know, that I'm really passionate about enforceable undertakings because I've researched them and I've been involved in so many that have been truly impactful. And I love the opportunity to talk about them because, you know, when you go to a barbecue and you say you work in health and safety and you get that whole OHS eye roll, well, try saying that you work in enforceable undertakings and see what response you get. So today I'm going to discuss enforcement from two perspectives: external enforcement, so that is the regulatory enforcement tools and how they use them in a responsive regulatory and risk-based prioritization approach. That's a big word. And internal enforcement. So that is how companies enforce health and safety through their policies, procedures, and practices. For many years, believe it or not, I'm only 5'5". I was a basketball player and a high-level basketball coach. And when you coach elite athletes, not winning a game is failure, and failure is punishment. So as their coach, you don't then go and beat them with a big stick at the next training session. You reflect on the performance and the positives and the negatives, and you get agreement with the team on the way to move forward. You then train your ass off so that the next time you're on the court, success happens as though it's inherent because you are built to win and not because you are relying on some rigid structure or process full of rules to follow to achieve success. That's kind of my philosophy. So let's start with the current state of our safety laws and our regulatory reliance on retributive justice as the best form of enforcement to create deterrence to achieve compliance. Now, I think there are 4 problems with a punitive approach. So when I say a punitive approach, I'm talking about the proportionate punishment of offenders, which is known as retributive justice. Now, culturally, we have learned when something goes wrong, we should blame and punish people. And we actually get this from the English, you know, so we'll blame them. Since the introduction of the Factory Act and the establishment of a professional factory inspectorate back in 1933 under the then Prime Minister Earl Grey. This was then followed by and supported by Sir Robert Peel, the father of modern British policing. And it was under these guys that justice was all about retribution. Back then, if you offended, it was against the state or the king. And today it's still the same. It's against the Crown. And what's crazy about that is that the Crown doesn't get upset because a person has been hurt necessarily, but because one of their assets has been damaged. And so thanks to the English, this punitive culture has spread throughout the Commonwealth. And what we see today in our health and safety laws, because of this traditional form of justice, is that punishment and penalties are still considered the best response to a violation by a regulator. But also within our internal company policies and procedures. So, as I said, I think there are 4 problems. Number 1, inconsistent enforcement and penalties. For those of you who are a bit like me and you keep your eye on enforcement outcomes and prosecutions, so health and safety prosecutions particularly, and the penalties, you'll probably at some point have questioned their consistency. This has been a bit of a frustration of mine for some time. To me, discipline needs to be disciplined. It needs to be consistent. Otherwise, you just won't get the effect you're after. I don't know if everyone out there has children, but I certainly do. And I just think if I try and discipline one child more harshly than the other for the same thing, you'll very much get the responses in this photo here. Under our health and safety laws, the harshest punishment is prosecution, which potentially leads to a court penalty more often, but can also lead to imprisonment. This is generally reserved for the most serious offences and the most recalcitrant and dangerous offenders. Yet in Australia, between the years 2016 and 17, the average prosecution penalty was $60,000. So if I put it a different way, $60,000 is 2% of the maximum penalty for a corporation, and it's not quite 10% for an individual. In comparison, in Queensland, if you breach the Food Act, that's right, the Food Act, where no one can be seriously harmed, it could result in a $30,000 fine. So it was no surprise to see the submissions and outcomes in our Australian Senate inquiry into industrial deaths, reflecting the frustration and inconsistent enforcement and penalties. In that final report, the Senate committee for that inquiry stated, I think I've got it on a slide here, stated that the committee observes that the low level of penalties handed down in the recent past do not meet community expectations about the gravity of workplace fatalities, and nor do they effectively deter other organisations from disregarding the safety of workers. Not long after the Senate report, Marie Boland also reported in her review of the model health and safety laws, the inconsistencies of enforcement across our jurisdictions, reducing the effect of punitive punishment and deterrence. And Boland's report also went a bit deeper than prosecution. She commented on inconsistencies with other punitive regulatory tools, such as infringement notices and prohibition notices across our Australian jurisdictions. And she also compared them to the other legislation. So to give you an indication of the inconsistencies here, in New South Wales, the maximum penalty notice, which is like an on-the-spot fine, is $3,600. But generally they start at $125, which in Australia is half the cost of a speeding ticket. Okay, second problem, the reliance on the deterrence effect. Earlier this year, an Australian farmer was found guilty and fined $475,000 because a 14-year-old boy was killed when he fell off a tractor trailer. Will and his twin brother, Tom, were working on the farm in the school holidays. On that particular day, the boys had been collecting irrigation pipe in the paddocks, and they were loading them onto the back of the trailer. It was hitched to the tractor, kind of like in this picture here. At the end of the line, Will stood on the small platform between the tractor and the trailer to make the long journey back to the farmhouse. He stood there because the tractor only had one seat for the driver, which was his inexperienced and unlicensed brother Tom. Now, it probably seemed logical to stand there as there was no other way of getting back to the farmhouse besides walking. And to be honest, who would want to do that after a long, hard day in the paddock? So why did the farmer think that the boys would do anything different? Why didn't he tell them not to ride on the trailer platform? In Australia, and I'm certainly sure in New Zealand, there has been so much education and awareness and campaigns that have been done around farm and vehicle safety. And I'm certain other farmers have been prosecuted for similar fatalities around tractors and mobile equipment. Yet that didn't make this farmer stop and think. In this case, the magistrate in Queensland set our third largest monetary penalty at the time. The magistrate stated general deterrence and denunciation are of significant importance in this case. Significant importance. However, in sentencing, not only did the magistrate give the offenders a 50% discount on the penalty for their early guilty plea, he also agreed not to record the conviction against both the director and the company, or the PCBU. So not only do we have problems with inconsistent penalties, but there's also a discount on them. Seriously, you get a discount when you buy a television, not when you plead guilty to a workplace fatality. I think perhaps here we should use some different language on that one, because getting a discount does not help if you are trying to deter people. So the idea of general deterrence works on the notion of deterring general public, industries, communities from committing a crime by punishing those who offend. So when an offender is punished, it sends a clear message to the rest of society that the behaviour of this sort will result in an unpleasant response from the justice system. To achieve this, though, to deter general public, they then need to know about it. And in this case, there's actually very little knowledge about what happened. Apart from those involved in the prosecution process, only the local community knows what happened and who was involved. The local media initially reported the tragic incident, but there was no media coverage of the prosecution. Queensland's third highest monetary penalty did not warrant a newspaper article. So unless you're go and search through Queensland's regulator's public prosecution register, you won't find much on this case. So if no one really knows about it, how do you get general deterrence from it? Which leads me to the third problem: lackluster denunciation. Probably not quite the case for Mark Zuckerberg, but my point here is that in addition to no media coverage of the prosecution on that farmer's case, the names of the offenders have not been published anywhere. Now, I'm not advocating shaming. I just wonder if denunciation is of significant importance, then unless it's a high profile or a newsworthy case, how are we actually achieving that? Now, there's actually a reason behind why we don't see acts of public denunciation. And it comes down to, in Queensland particularly, our regulators publishing policies, which naturally stem from our Queensland legislation. And that relates to the recording of a conviction. So in Queensland, where a court orders no conviction to be recorded, they'll remove all identifiable information from any publications. So as I said earlier, the offender had no conviction recorded, and as such, there's no identifying information published. So even though denunciation was significantly important, they're not allowed to denounce them. No conviction equals silence, and silence, to me, does not denounce or deter people. Now, apart from being a director myself, I do a lot of work with boards and executives around risk appetite and tolerance. And what is really interesting about those conversations is that safety is always in their top 5 risks because they don't want to hurt anybody. But what outranks safety almost every time is reputation. Even those companies who say safety is their #1 priority. And when it comes to financial impact, they know they can afford a safety breach. But it's the cost of reputational damage that is uncertain and what really concerns them. So last problem I think is the efficacy of punitive consequences. So what I see with this problem is the current approach of enforcement is the efficacy of punitive consequences. In particular, regulatory researchers have been warning us of this reduced confidence level of prosecution for some time. So Richard Johnson reports in the way in which health and safety offences are treated in the court system and the focus on individual and specific events rather than the broader context, such as organisational work and the quality of health and safety management, may be reducing the broader impact of prosecution. And I've heard time and time again, and I'm sure some of you have as well, that prosecution is considered in some cases a bit like the old slap on the wrist. And then you just return to work, business as usual. Now I'm sharing this, unfortunately this is an unpublished study that we conducted here in Queensland into the effectiveness of enforceable undertakings in comparison to prosecutions as an enforcement option. One of the interviewees made this comment, and I've highlighted the main part. A simple fine, you just walk up to the accountant, you tell them to pay the fine, and it just goes. Nothing happens. We had lots of comments similar to that in this study. So then, of course, there's always the issue that you can buy statutory liability insurance, which covers fines, penalties, legal costs of investigating and defending your claims. So is it that the big stick just doesn't really hurt as much as what we think? The question this raises in my mind is reduced efficacy of punitive consequences. Is this one of the reasons why we have a very little shift in our fatality and injury statistics over the past several years? For example, if we look just at prosecution, under our national compliance and enforcement policy here in Australia, prosecution is described as the response used, as I said earlier, for the most serious offences, the most recalcitrant and dangerous offenders. So if we look at the prosecution statistics, the total number of prosecutions in Australia in 2016 and 17 was 221. We had, in that same time frame, 178 fatalities. And if we look at the serious injury rate, it was 9.3 per 1,000 employees. That then totals to 106,438 fatalities and serious injuries. Now, I understand this is not a perfect comparison. I'm no statistician. And there are many factors involved in both prosecution and injury claims. But even if I add in other punitive enforcement actions, which were 43,940 notices, so they were the prohibition, improvement and infringement notices handed out across Australia in that same time frame. We're still only at 44,161 regulatory actions, which still significantly is below the number of fatalities and serious injuries for that year. What I think this demonstrates is a lack of enforcement action, which reinforces the lack of deterrence being generated from these punitive consequences. Remembering that deterrence works when people believe there's a good chance that non-compliance will be detected and they will be sufficiently punished. So when you're not being consistent and actively using the powers of the regulator to reduce the efficacy, you do then reduce the efficacy of punitive consequences, and you just don't change behaviour. So I see these four problems with the punitive approach. And so now I want to discuss some ideas on how we can better influence behaviour and decision making. What is it that we can do to advance from this reliance on punishment and deterrence and become more collaborative and restorative in meeting compliance obligations and potentially beyond that? Rightio. So this is the pyramid that comes out of the national compliance and enforcement policy that I mentioned earlier. The pyramid represents the responsive regulatory approach, with the type and relative volume of proportionate use of their enforcement tools. Naturally, at the bottom of the pyramid is encouraging compliance, so information, guidance, education, and advice. And that is the most used, hence it's the bigger part of the pyramid. Then as we move up the pyramid, we go towards the more punitive actions. This is where we see at the very top our court sanctions, which are applied less frequently, as we saw in the statistics. Now, the pyramid also represents an escalation, so to speak, of enforcement, but there are some tools in here that are alternative responses. And naturally, they don't have to start at the bottom and work their way up. They can start anywhere in the pyramid. So I labelled the bottom as transformative tools. These are the ones we use internally and we see regulators using a lot. And they are designed to act upon intrinsic, closely held motivations of duty holders. They take into account their learning styles, their strengths, their capabilities, and through education, advice, support, we help them to build those desires, knowledge, and capability to comply. Then higher up in the pyramid, you'll see enforceable undertakings. They're considered for more serious offences, which are, but they are collaborative, they're restorative, and they are truly transforming. Research shows when using these transformative tools with a persuasive approach, they are very effective. This is because they focus on respectful collaboration and structures that foster sustainable solutions and a culture of compliance. They work because they not only educate duty holders, so they know what is expected of them, but they also praise and encourage them so that they feel they have the ability to comply. So today I want to focus on enforceable undertakings, as Matt said, as they are quite often lesser known and involve a restorative approach. Under our model safety laws, the EU is a high-level sanction designed to provide systemic and enduring outcomes tailored to the nature of the offence with broader benefits for the industry and the community. So regulators have a discretionary power to accept a written EU from a person in connection with an alleged contravention. However, in Australia, and I'm not sure if they've changed the laws in New Zealand, it does not include a Category 1 offence, which are offences relating to reckless conduct, and it also excludes industrial manslaughter offence. So when people ask me, what is an EU? After a few Brexit jokes, I generally respond with, well, it's kind of like a contract in which the promises you make are enforceable in court. So basically, a business, a PCBU, makes an offer of an EU. It has all of the commitments and deliverables that they promise to do, and they provide that to the regulator. So each regulator has published EU guidelines for their process. The EU guidelines provide the duty holder with all the requirements, expectations, and templates for the process. So if you're intrigued, go have a look. It's probably only about 10 pages. It's really a transparent process, and the development of the EU with the regulator can be as collaborative as the duty holder prefers. It's important to note that the regulator's actual decision maker is never part of the development process, and even the evaluation process, the initial evaluation process. And at no point throughout the development process is there ever a promise to the duty holder that the EU will be accepted. So the guidelines state that EUs are only accepted if appropriate given the circumstances, and it's likely to deliver more wide-ranging effects than can be achieved by prosecution, which in almost every case is possible due to the criteria for them to be accepted. There's a commitment to deliver significant, tangible, long-term benefits to health and safety in the workplace, the industry, and the broader community. So for this reason, they are financially cost more than a prosecution fine. They also have a significant accountability cost that you actually don't read about that part of it. And of course, you don't get an accountability cost with a court penalty. So for many who go through the enforceable undertaking process, they describe these costs as an investment into improving health and safety. And almost every time they say it was an investment they should have made earlier. So this is one of the reasons why EUs are transformative. They transcend from simply paying for your crime, because they are designed to make these long-lasting systemic changes to prevent incidents, and incidents beyond the original offending environment. They're about changing behaviour, taking positive action, and not just making minimal rectifications to show mitigation. So EUs have been described as a form of restorative justice because they can bring together people to resolve collectively how to deal with the aftermath of the offence and its implications for the future. The benefits of the workplace, the industry, and the broader community has similarities to the restorative justice triangle that looks like this. It looks to repair harm, restore relationships, and create improved community safety, competency development, and accountability. Sounds like an EU. And that's why I believe that EU is a sanction that turns a penalty into rehabilitation. So I say this because I've seen so many companies transform over the period of their EU. Generally, they're about 3 years. Some companies take a little bit longer, which is okay. I had one about a year ago, one very savvy businessman say to me, you know, Naomi, I could have just paid the fine, changed just a little bit, not much at all. But instead of that, doing the EU, my business is better off, my community is better off, and I feel better too. So I've got some quick stats on EUs for you. Since the 1st of April 2016, you guys have had 24 accepted EUs in New Zealand. This has seen 3.8 million distributed across workplaces, industries, and community health and safety initiatives. Victoria and Queensland are the two longest running EU programs in Australia, health and safety EU programs. Recently, Queensland made an EU comparison, which I kind of like how they've done this. I think it's a really good way of demonstrating the value of the restorative approach. So of the 145 EUs accepted in Queensland to date, there's a total of $38 million that has been spent on improving health and safety in workplaces, industries, and communities. So what they did was they compared this to the equivalent that would have been given in penalties. So remember the 221 prosecutions that would have gone into consolidated revenue, so 8.7 million. And I think that's, there's a very important point here is that when you pay the penalty, it goes into consolidated revenue. And you don't really see the positive out of that. You don't really see what happens in the long run, what the impact is. Whereas enforcing a commitment to invest and improve health and safety across those three areas, there is a tangible and substantial impact that you can see. So as I said before, EUs are described as a form of restorative justice because they bring together people to resolve collectively how to deal with the aftermath of the offence and its implications for the future. Now, restorative justice is a term described to describe a number of processes that bring together those affected by an incident or a conflict. And my research tells me that New Zealand is the country with the most developed programmatic commitment to restorative justice. So I'm actually not going to lecture you guys on this at all. Braithwaite, a researcher here in Australia, suggests that you guys are the vanguard. One of his reasonings being because all sides of politics support restorative justice, from mainstream conservative, social democratic parties right through to the right and the police. And he noted that the strongest opposition comes from lawyers and some judges. From my experience, the reason behind this is the old lack of case law argument. And so for them, there's this trade-off between creating a precedent and the potential improvement delivered through an EU. For those of you who are less familiar with restorative practice, an excellent example is a facilitated forum known as conferencing, like in the picture here. So conferencing actually brings together people affected by a specific incident or conflict to understand what has happened, how people have been affected, to respond to the conflict, make amends, and explore the possibility of preventing any further harm and doing it together. It gives voice to victims and the affected third parties. So some people out there who are right into this, they're way smarter than me when it comes to restorative justice. And they say the reason this works is not because it's based on resolving conflict. It is based on resolving conflict and not simply just trying to fix something with punishment. And they use the word conflict. And I think that works really well, because when we find, what we find is when an incident occurs, it happens on someone else's terms. Generally, it comes uninvited and it can't be undone. So this can leave strong negative feelings towards the people involved and the people responsible. And it creates this conflict between everyone, between colleagues and supervisors and owners of businesses. So conflict, by definition, is strong negative feelings towards others. So any process that's going to respond to conflict must allow for those feelings to be acknowledged and talked through. They recommend a conference should only involve the stakeholders, victims, and affected third parties for a specific incident. So depending on the scale of the incident, that might include workers, contractors, supervisors, managers, owners of the business, families, union groups, industry groups, and potentially others in the community. Experts say that for the conference to be effective, it's important that the process is not dominated by a search for the truth or the facts. It's not an investigation, but rather a forum for understanding the impact of the incident and what it means for the future. So when I think about our processes, both regulatory and internal investigation processes within our companies, we certainly don't do that. We are clearly focused on finding the facts. So let's consider this idea of framing an incident as a form of conflict rather than a dispute. And when we do this, it creates a very different intent for our questioning and provides us greater opportunity to learn. So in a dispute process, we typically ask, who did it and what do we have to do to them? Think about the process for your incident investigation in your company. Is it dominated by a search for truth or facts, creating the timeline? And if the answers you get don't align with your company policies and procedures or values, then are you off to HR for performance management? Instead, a restorative conference, we ask questions and we seek to understand what happened, how have people been affected, and what can we do to make things better? What this does is that it encourages people to express openly, to share with others, to deepen their understanding of what has happened. It allows the group to learn more about how they and others have been affected, to understand the emotional impact, and eventually to determine what to do, if anything, to make things better. At this point, regulators don't really engage in this type of conferencing with EUs, and it's something that I try to encourage if I come in and facilitate them. Now, I do want to say, don't get me wrong, there is still a case to refer people to HR for performance management. But what the process does allow for is a better understanding of behaviours and why decisions are made. And I think if we're going to effectively influence behaviour and decision making, then we actually need a way to understand it. So I bring you to the idea of restorative practice because I believe it needs to be better understood in the health and safety space. I don't have all the answers, but I encourage you to go find them. I think a greater balance between retributive and restorative justice can have a greater impact on compliance and preventing injuries and illnesses. So from an internal company perspective, when we look at our company's policies, procedures, and processes, what's the language used and how much of them are focused on punitive consequences? Is there anything in there about creating a conference of some sort? So I've already asked this, but does your investigation process allow for a forum to really understand what happened and how people have been affected? I suggest you go have a look at your systems and see if they all go straight to a dispute resolution policy. Does the investigation procedure escalate to performance management only? I recommend exploring practices such as learning teams and appreciative inquiry, and there is a link there to David Cooper-Ryder. I also challenge safety regulators to consider restorative practice, what that looks like from their perspective and how they can better incorporate the use of practices in their enforcement toolkit. In closing today, I want to leave you by saying that introducing more restorative practice into how we enforce health and safety, whether as regulators or as companies, is not about changing everything. It's not about throwing out the old and in with the new. Research shows there are some offenders who just do not respond to restorative approaches, and therefore there is no option than to use punitive measures. So what I'm suggesting is about transforming the retributive mindset, as there needs to be a balanced approach. Too much of our regulatory response is more about the stick and less about repairing harm, restoring relationships, and reducing reoffending. And that segues very nicely into my last slide, which is a quote from Lewis B. Smedes. Restorative justice is not a replacement for retributive justice, but a complement. It seeks the rehabilitation of the wrongdoer and the repair of the victim's injury. So in a sense, it's a little bit like safety 2, I should say, where it complements safety 1. They should work together and not out with the old, in with the new. And that's what I have, Matt. So I'm open to take questions.
Awesome, thanks, Naomi. That was really cool, thank you so much. And yeah, there were a number of questions that came through whilst you were talking. We've got one from our good friend, Kevin Jones. Yeah, all the way from
Kevin.
Can't hide anywhere, can you? Kevin very kindly actually attended the New Zealand Health and Safety Professionals Conference here in Christchurch last year, and also took a recording interview with myself and a number of other participants. And so, yeah, it's great to have him join us here today. His question, Naomi, is industrial manslaughter the clearest example of retributive justice we have?
Oh, well, absolutely, because whilst we have now seen imprisonment being awarded as penalties, definitely here in Queensland, I think most of those, well, the case here in Queensland was appealed, and so he's no longer in prison. There haven't been too many imprisonments for health and safety offences. Oh, there goes the police. So I think what we will find as industrial manslaughter spreads throughout the country and our regulators start to actually use that enforcement tool, we will start to see imprisonment. And I think that is ultimately the most punitive measure that we have. You can't insure against going to prison.
No, actually, you know what? Do I take pleasure in it? No, not really. It's always interesting to tell or explain to business owners, senior leaders, that they can't insure themselves against health and safety acts and laws. It's often a bit of a shock to them, and it's like, well, it's just like a speeding ticket or a parking fine. You can't insure yourself against those either, guys. You know, so
Yeah.
Interesting times. I love the fact that New Zealand is considered the vanguard for restorative justice. That's very exciting.
So it has its roots in tribal culture. So yep, the Maoris, the Australian Aborigines, and Canada, the first people of Canada.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. I mean, it's certainly my experience here in New Zealand. I've been here for about 16 years now. There still seems to be, at its very core, a real sense of democratic value, that they see people's rights, individual rights, as integral to its culture. And I think that's probably, we're now seeing that very openly since the Health and Safety Act changed. So it's all very new. We don't have a great deal of case law to refer to. So instead, we have to really focus in on what is culturally acceptable, what is our cultural norms. So it's definitely interesting time.
I think the real key here, sorry, I'm going to not answer your question for a moment, is that accountability piece. So particularly with the conferencing is if they are willing, having the victim and the offender in the room. And so we see a lot of this in youth justice, is that accountability that the offender has to have to the victim. And it's what is it that they are going to do to repair the harm and restore a relationship if there was one originally. Yes. And it's that piece there. So when we think of prosecution and, you know, fines and imprisonment, it's all about they have to pay. Yes. And I think this accountability piece of being accountable to the person you harmed is the ultimate payment if you deliver upon that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also love the piece on learning teams, that appreciative inquiry. I know, talking to Jono recently, I know that the team at Connetics have been doing quite a bit of this, where they've moved away from the traditional ICAM type investigation technique, where 3 or 4 individuals lock themselves in a room, go through all the facts and figures and try and come up with the best root cause solution. Whereas what we're suggesting here is actually just to bring all of the actors together in a safe space to have that conversation, which ultimately is what the Health and Safety at Work Act is truly trying to achieve, right? It's all about communication and engagement. So yeah, super exciting to see that being put into practice with the use of EUs. It's good stuff.
And learning teams, and so, probably going to go against all the consultants here, but learning teams and appreciative inquiry, there's heaps out there. It's not new stuff.
Yes.
You can literally Google it and find heaps of information about it. It's really simple. And like I encourage listeners, if they've got the resources, is to run an ICAM and actually also do a learning team or an appreciative inquiry and see your 2 outcomes, and you'll see, I guess, how they can complement and inform each other, but you will certainly get 2 very different list of actions.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. Do yourselves out of business. It's really true. I guess, like, for me, it's something that I've come to realize over the last few years, is that in order to continue to be successful at what it is we do, right? So we're all trying to make the world a safer place and to help people get home safely. But we're moving away from the traditional tick box exercise, which our profession has really fallen into the trap of doing for many, many years. And now we're starting to see the real value of those integral skills, the soft skills, the ability to facilitate and to create safe spaces to talk openly and freely. I think that's really where the world of health and safety and other experts in various fields are going to have to head if they want to continue to be relevant.
Actually, I'll go back on my point about consultants. When I've spoken about this previously, and one of the questions I had was, Are there consultants out there? Yes, there are. And should you use a consultant or an independent person? And yes is the question to that. Certainly someone independent. With restorative conferencing, there is a lot of preparation work that's done. Each person has an individual session. Obviously, they have to agree to attend a conference, and they need their own preparation for that, because it could be quite confronting coming into that room. You imagine a room full of union reps and victims and third parties and things like that. It could be quite heated. So there is a lot of preparation, and particularly in those bigger cases. So yes, I would encourage definitely someone independent to facilitate.
All right. If you've still got time, there's two more questions I'd love to go. One's from Sarah Clark, and she asks, are there some key articles or websites that you would recommend for AI and learning teams to start with, or any good courses you'd recommend?
So in the slide there is David Cooper-Ryder. He is the guy of appreciative inquiry. It has been around, I think the theory of it was back in the 60s or something. So, I mean, you could probably go to your local library and find a book even. But David Cooper-Ryder, certainly he was in Australia sometime earlier this year, running more like masterclasses, I would suggest. And I think he does have an online course, but he is American. So they're possibly, all courses are all in America.
Yes. Oh, cool. Awesome. Thank you. And then finally, any advice for shifting directors or business owners from dispute to conflict approach when investigating incidents?
Oh, it's always fun. And it's the old safety versus HR argument. And, you know, we want to do this. We want to work together. Look, to me, the approach is to start with HR. Is to get them on board. They are human resources, so they are all about humans or people and culture. You know, and if you have them on board and you work together and go together, I think you can start to make some moves in the executive level in the boardroom. It's like anything, you know, some good case studies, some good evidence base to support your approach or your idea will certainly help. That said, though, as I said, there still needs to be, you know, it's a balanced approach. You can't just wipe something out completely. So I don't think it necessarily is about removing performance management from companies. There still certainly needs to be there, but it's not performance management or EAP. There needs to be something in between, an alternative.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I love it. Wow, thank you so much. It's been really, really valuable information. Naomi's also very kindly going to allow us to share a slightly more condensed version of the presentation, one that's shareable. So you'll be able to see the slides and all of the really valuable links and content that goes with that. But yeah, for now, thank you so much for your time, Naomi. Yeah, sorry I got your spelling wrong there. That's like...
That's okay, Matt. I should say, that's okay, Mark.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've got the time, please, by all means, stick around, watch the rest of the show. But I know you've got a busy schedule, so you do what you need to do. If anyone obviously wants to get in touch with Naomi, all the contact details are there. Bit of a superstar, someone who's also been very open to answering questions and engaging.
Absolutely. LinkedIn, Twitter, email, I don't mind.
That's brilliant. So thank you once again, and no doubt I'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks,
Matt. It sounds like a bit of a threat, doesn't it? All right, now I'm just going to do my magic here. I'm going to share that. Okay, so hopefully you guys can all still hear me. If you can quickly just tap or type into the chat box to let me know that you can, at the very least, still hear me in the background, that would be amazing. Thank you all also for taking the time to complete that poll. The poll results we'll share just after this presentation. Cool. Thank you, Bill. Awesome. Thanks, Teresa. Hey, team. Yay. Lots of engagement. Thanks. You guys are awesome. Which leads us really neatly into the next section of this. Well, let's call it a conference. Let's call it what it is. So we've still scheduled to go until 12:30 today, and I really wanted to use some of this time to start engaging with you all, using some of the tools that we have at our disposal within this conference call. So I'm just going to take us through some of the next few slides. So I've taken back control of the screen here. So there's Naomi's contact details, a real superstar. Please, by all means, reach out to her. Long-time supporter of this group, and I've been a long-time supporter of her. She's a superstar. Alrighty, so we've done some Q&As with Naomi, and so now we're getting back into Breaking the Norm Conference 2019. Thank you so much for those that have shared their pictures on social media, hashtag NZHSP on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. It's been really good to see your posts and pictures all over the social media front. If you can, grab your phone, take a pic, share it across your favourite social media platforms. Also, whilst we've been on air, we have edged ever closer to that magic 900 members on the Facebook group. So there was a flurry of activity when we went live at 9:30 this morning. If you're still sitting on the defence and not sure if you want to join or not, by all means do so. It'd be amazing if we could get over that 900 members before the end of this session. Super exciting times. Okay, so without further ado, what I wanted to do is simply open up the discussion. So in your webinar tools, there should be an area where you can roll your mouse over, and it should say chat. You should be able to click on that, and that opens up your chat box. So really, this is just an opportunity to take some feedback, maybe to ask some questions that you haven't had a chance to ask, or whether you want to simply provide some feedback or thoughts about the conference so far. So by all means, get stuck in, type away. For me, I think personally, the quality of the speakers has been incredible. Being able to see Jono Brent bringing Safety 2 into life, into practice, is a really rare opportunity. We often read or hear about these ideas, often in textbooks or newspaper articles or magazines, but it's really refreshing to actually see that in practice. And then with Naomi Kemp and her experience with enforceable undertakings, which really, for me at least, still feel very new here in New Zealand. We're still trying to explore it. How awesome is it to be considered at the vanguard of the change of actually implementing those and getting the very most out of restorative justice. Amazing. And it really gives me a lot of hope, but also reinforces my belief that New Zealand is sitting on the cusp of the real potential of becoming a leader in health and safety, not only just in New Zealand or Australasia, but internationally. Speaking to people in the UK, speaking to people in North America and in South Africa in recent times, it's becoming really quite apparent that the world is watching what New Zealand is doing. How exciting to think that we're at the forefront of that change, doing things differently, shaking the foundations of the traditional way in which we do training and getting together, I feel, is really what is needed. And I think I applaud all of you for joining us here today. So some feedback so far. So this is from Sharon Foote. Thanks, Sharon. I've really enjoyed this format. It allows me to be available at work if needed and not to have to travel. It's one of the reasons why we did this. Some of the feedback we got from last year's conference was that you wanted to do something again this year in 2019. However, resources dictated that we couldn't pull off another physical conference. So the discussion went on, and we came to the conclusion that an online conference would be the best option available to us. So I'm really pleased to hear that it's paid off. Bill Nelson, great to have a real life safety differently journey from Jono. It's how to start that can put us off starting. There is a reality check, but also hope and encouragement to do it. Yes, Bill, love it. from Angie Saywell. Hey Angie, thank you so much for your engagement levels. Lots of questions and stuff coming through from you, brilliant. Angie says, this is awesome, Matt. I attended last year's conference and wasn't sure how I would make it to work, how I'd make it work this year with my 5-month-old baby boy. Congratulations, Angie, that's awesome news. I'm really pleased that we were able to present and provide something to you that meets your needs. The workforce is changing and adapting all the time, right? So being able to produce something that is relevant and is making use of the tools that we have available to us in today's context, awesome. Love it. It's been cool to be able to participate from home. Good on you, Angie, and congratulations on Bubba. Britta Brandenhorst, this was awesome. As the rest have mentioned, I can attend without being away from work. Go for gold. Yes, Britta, love it. Teresa, really needed the hero to host leader message, fits into our current thinking. This is huge, and this is something that I personally have been kind of learning over the last few years to move away from. I think we all make this mistake, particularly in our roles, right? So often we probably find ourselves only one or of a small team of health and safety people within our business. We are given the impression that we have a ton of additional responsibilities on our shoulders, and we're told to just get on with it. Therefore, the hero kind of characteristics, really, it's inevitable, right? You're left to feel like you have to shoulder all responsibility. Moving away from that and fostering and adopting a way in which you are simply saying, there's a problem and we need as a whole to create the solution. Tapping into the subject matter experts within the business that you find yourself in, engaging with them, making them realize that their opinions and ideas are valid, is so empowering. As the move away from that hero to host leader is super critical. Really awesome to hear Jono talk about that. Okay, Lee Ratcliffe. Oh no, sorry, Bill Nelson. Matt and sponsors, big thank you for putting this together. Such an investment in us. Much respect. Thank you, Bill. Lee Ratcliffe. Far better than traveling to attend a conference. Yeah, I get it, Lee. I was tabling the idea of doing something in Auckland. Obviously, that's where most people in New Zealand are based. On the other hand, it's also where all the traffic happens to be. So it's kind of real balancing out, trying to figure out something that's going to fit for all, which will lead me to the next conversation, which I really want you to stick around for because I really need your input. Rochelle Nicholson, this is fantastic. Whoa, that was a big thing from Paul Harrison. Okay, Rochelle, this is fantastic. First time attending. It's great that I don't have to travel. I have a cost to the business to attend. Great speakers too. Thank you so much, Rochelle. Paul Harrison, I'm relatively new to health and safety, having a food technology, ISO 9000 and HACCP food safety background. Pretty much the same language, but just a different dialect. My assessment of the health and safety landscape in New Zealand is that it is a cost plus, with no studies yet of the cost benefits from an integrated quality health and safety management program. Yeah, definitely. When HACCP was implemented 20 plus years ago, there were medium to long-term cost benefits to food manufacturers from improved efficiency, reduced product recalls and reject. Has anyone conducted a study on the cost benefits of implementation of the health and safety program in New Zealand? I think there has been some very early papers in New Zealand on an international front. Definitely, there's been some great pieces released in recent times. Links to those aren't coming straight to my head, but I can certainly reference those on the NZHSP website post this event. But yeah, absolutely, I completely agree that there's a big piece to do around the maturity of integrated management systems, and another piece to do around the cost benefit of having a more comprehensive or intelligent management system in place. Right, Teresa, ditto Rochelle, yeah, Lee Knightley, have you thought about environmental issues? Great speakers, really enjoyed them. Yeah, environmental management is definitely on the radar for sure, Lee. Oriette, Nicole's presentation has, Naomi's presentation has reminded me about appreciative inquiry and how useful that will be in the health and safety field. Great for us from deep south, not having to travel and accommodation expenses. An excellent learning and refreshing morning. Thank you all. Awesome, thank you, Oriette. That has reminded me that there is a big event taking place in Invercargill tomorrow. It's an NZISM event. Be sure to check that out. I know it has been mentioned on the NZHSP Facebook website. It's a free event taking place in the Invercargill southern region of New Zealand tomorrow. Awesome. Okay, right. Thank you so much for your incredible feedback. I'm starting to feel like a radio broadcaster now. Okay, amazing. All right, so we've got 30 minutes to go, and really what I wanted to do now is really encourage you guys to stick around, because there are lots of really exciting announcements in this next section. And it's also a really great way for you guys and girls to become directly involved in what is happening here. Yes. So it's 9 AM tomorrow morning at Ascot Park, Invercargill. There's a NZISM free event taking place in Invercargill tomorrow. Amazing. Shelley Godman, final comment. I've found this very informative and taken note of some valuable pointers and tools to take back to my organisation. Yes, that's exactly what we're aiming for. Online, no cost has been the difference between being involved or not so much. Thank you. Thank you, Shelley. Again, another key reason why we've done this. We wanted to remove all barriers, financial, geographical, your ability to take time off of work, your ability to take time away from family and loved ones at home. This is all about you guys. Okay, whew. Let's do this. So once again, big thank you to our principal sponsors, one of which is Sign. These guys are super duper awesome. They were one of our key sponsors at last year's conference. They're all about streamlining some of those administrative and health and safety related processes within your workplace. These guys help you to manage your visitors within the workplace, utilizing the tablet screens, which you can customize the questions that are being asked of the visitors. You can ensure that the right people within your organization are notified of the things that they need to be made aware of, and none of the noise and clutter that goes with that. You can also ensure that your visitors are given the most up-to-date information when they are signing in. This is really great when it comes to moving sites with changing risks and hazards. If you think about your modern day construction sites, civil engineering type sites, isn't it awesome to have that ability to pass on real information to those that are being signed in and inducted then and there. As well as that, the people who are being visited will receive text message, SMS notifications to say that their visitors have arrived. Also, this is really exciting, is you can geomap a place of work. So your site supervisors, project managers will get notified when a particular contractor is approaching that workplace. No more trying to find John and Sally when you arrive on site. Super annoying, super time consuming. This is a great way of saving time. They also have the use of the what's it called? I can't remember the name of that wee square thing. I'm sure you guys are probably screaming at your computer screens now telling me what it is. QR codes. So it generates a QR code so that you can then stick that code onto a notice board or a hazard risk board at your site. And think about this, if you've got remote workplaces within your company and you want to get site-specific information to the contractors and those lone workers that are out there in the middle of nowhere, they can simply scan that code using the photo option on their phone, which will then tell them site-specific hazard risk critical information. It'll also notify those back at the office where the lone workers are, when they logged in and when they logged out. Super amazing. Instant alerts if there is an evacuation at that place of work, whether it's an office, a building or a construction site. Everyone who is logged in will get an instant evacuation notice to tell them to get off site immediately and tell them where to go. And if you've got regular contractors who are routinely coming to your place of work, they will be able to sign in simply using the mobile app, which is for free. Amazing. These guys are kicking it when it comes to site inductions, signing in and out, and contractor management. A special offer for those who are part of this incredible event. For those who use and reference NZHSP Conference 2019, not only do you get a free 30-day trial with no bank details required, you also get extra special attention from the sign team, but you'll also get some special attention from my team here at Advanced Safety to ensure that you get the very best experience when using the sign tool. Basically, you've got nothing to lose, so please definitely check that out. All right, so we are moving into the final section of this presentation. We've got some really important updates that I really want to ensure that you guys are all aware of. Okay, so first and foremost, we've got some local events coming up before the end of this year. So we're trying to squeeze these in before the silly season kicks off. I know we'll all be heads down, bums up in the near future, if not already. So what we've done is established some local events, which are all low-key. There's a rough agenda to them. Really, it's super simple. It's a case of just turning up to share a coffee, perhaps share a scone with some of your peers. Yes, there is the word professional within this group. However, it's designed for those at entry level, or even those that haven't even dipped their toe in health and safety yet, all the way up to seasoned professionals. And it's the opportunity to simply touch base, to share those horror stories, to find out what's worked in the past for some people, to get top tips and advice. Also, hopefully enjoy a good quality coffee away from the office environment, even if it's just for half an hour or so. So the local events that are coming up include in Queenstown at Frank's Eatery on the 20th of November at 10:30. It's at the Remarkables Park. That's going to be hopefully facilitated by one or two good folk down there. Mel Dunstan has put her hand up, just throwing you in the deep end there, Mel, to help facilitate this meeting. Mel was one of our guest speakers at last year's conference and long-time supporter of the group, and she'll be there to meet you guys and to help walk you through that session. We've also got one here in Christchurch at C1 Coffee. This just happens to be my favourite coffee shop, 185 High Street. This will kick off at 28th of November at 12:30 p.m. I hope to be there in person. I may not be there, and I've got a good reason. On the 25th of November, we're due to have baby number 5. So there's a good chance I'll be at home running around with nappies in one hand and milk in the other, I imagine. But if, like in the past, Bubs is a little bit late, I'll certainly be there. And we've also got a session up in Hamilton, the Kahurangi Cafe, which is near Gate 1. Lots of parking available near Gate 1 at the University of Waikato on the 22nd of November at 2 p.m. This will be facilitated by my good friend Mike Davies, again, long-term supporter of this group and all-round good sort. We've also tentatively put out there that we will be having a Auckland get-together before the end of this year. There's a couple of possible dates. We're just waiting to verify those. As soon as they are determined, we will share those on the NZHSP Facebook group. If you haven't already joined the NZHSP Facebook group, get onto it. All of these events will be shared there. Actually, they were done there last night. Some of you probably received a number of requests for these meetings. You're probably wondering why I was asking you to go to Hamilton, like you're based in Christchurch. But that's where you will get the latest information about these events and forthcoming events. There's still plenty on the radar, some of which I'm going to be talking to in a moment. So these are all free. Really, it's just the price of a cup of coffee. Be sure to get yourself a coffee, a tea, or some yummy snack at one of these venues, just to simply acknowledge the space that's been provided. Again, like I said before, all low key. It's really just a case of just meeting and greeting and spending some time with some really good folk. Okay, so next important update, steering groups. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this this conference, feels like ages ago now, originally set up late December 2016 on LinkedIn. March this year, went over to Facebook as well. We now have over 1,500 people signed up to both groups. Cool, thanks Mel. And really, we've had a small group of individuals that have really been at this kind of spearheading the journey. Those that were behind the scenes at last year's conference, who really put so much time and energy into it, the volunteers, the supporters, the sponsors, which we just couldn't do any of this without their support. However, what we have realized is that this thing that we've created, this project, really has legs in it, and it's just growing from strength to strength. As I mentioned earlier, we on average are receiving 25 new members to the NZHSP Facebook group per week, which is incredible. It's not being solicited, it's not via paid for sponsor or anything like that, it's simply word of mouth. We're clearly doing something right. And in order for this to continue with the journey, we've got to make sure that it's sustainable. And so what we're asking for are people to simply put their hand up. A bit like what Jono was talking about earlier on, where we are simply acting as host leaders, where we are describing in broad sense that compelling future, where we believe that New Zealand is at the forefront of health and safety in practice, that we have incredible business leaders, that we have incredible experts and subject matter experts, both here on New Zealand shores, but also heaps and heaps of experts and subject matter experts around the world who are all applauding us and celebrating what we're achieving and encouraging us and literally taking their time to and resource to support the journey. It tells me that we really do have a compelling future here in New Zealand, and that in order for NZHSP to really make a mark and to help direct and push that journey, we need to enroll others. And really, it's all about collectivity. It always has been. Despite, obviously my name has been kind of a big part of this, but really that's just by circumstance rather than for any reason. It's time to really open the doors and to bring a steering group together. So, rambling on, what we are looking for are individuals just like you to put your hand up to help to define what the project is. I don't want to make the mistake of producing a blueprint and assuming that I know everything, because that is not what a host leader does. It's purely to create that safe space to help facilitate that conversation. That group of people will then help to define some goals and then set some actions. It's as simple as that. So what we're looking for is on the 29th of November. Again, I'm dicing with fate here, because I may be up to my neck in it with helping my partner Kaylee with our fifth child in the house. However, I want to keep the momentum going. So on Friday, the 29th of November 2019 at 2 p.m, we will be hosting an NZHSP steering group here on Zoom on a conference call. So once again, we are removing all of those traditional barriers of transportation, of getting time off work, of being able to afford transport, all of that good stuff. We'll be able to do it live on a conference call. And for those who put their hand up and may not necessarily be able to attend that session, we'll certainly have you involved in the email correspondence that will no doubt come from that. Cool, thank you, Diane Compton, sorry Dan, for putting your hand up. Also, thanks Mel for putting your hand up down in Queenstown. Also, so the steering group in this session, we will start to flesh out perhaps some of our own expertise, some of our areas of skill and knowledge, perhaps start to flesh out perhaps some ideas for 2020 and what that may look like and beyond. Brilliant, love to have you on board, Britta, that would be amazing. And to start to flesh out how we can actually make some of those things happen. I've already had people in my ear saying that they want to have a physical conference next year. I'm still of two minds. I know next year we have a number of conferences within the health and safety sphere. It could be quite busy. I don't want to take attention away from other great conferences and events. Those things are really up for discussion, and it would be great to have as many of you as part of that as possible. So again, this event, the NZHSP Steering Group for Friday 29th of November at 2 p.m. is listed on the NZHSP Facebook group. So be sure to join that group, be sure to join up to these events and get involved in the conversation. The event page for this one, we'll also have a few polls put in there before the event as well to really get discussion going before it all goes live. Exciting times. Alrighty, so again, just want to thank our principal sponsors. Again, just a quick message about our friends at Checkmate. These guys are super awesome. Another Kiwi success story where they saw a need for a simple way in which to check plant, both static and mobile, in a really simple and effective way. So what Checkmate have done is created some really sophisticated hardware, which is really easy to install. It's as simple as pulling off the sticky label on the back and then placing these cool wee tags on the static equipment, perhaps heavy duty racking, which is really great for manufacturing and retail spaces. And also on mobile plant and equipment like forklifts, for example. The tags do 2 or 3 different things. So some of that mobile plant that may require more frequent checking has an LED light built into it. So the one in the middle, that's the hexagonal, there you go, that's showing my maths ignorance, shape, has a light there. So if it's been checked within the last 24 hours, it will be flashing green. As soon as it clicks over 24 hours, it goes to red. You can set the check frequency rate to as little or as frequently as you want, up to every 15 minutes. Each of these devices has its own specific checklist. And so as you can see, the chap in the middle there is scanning his mobile phone up against one of these tags, which then opens up the specific checklist for that item. Now, it requires a phone with near or NFC capability, which then means that the specific checklist for that piece of equipment will then pop up. You simply go through the yes, no answers. If there's a fault, you can take a photo of that. Then that notifies via email the person that needs to be made aware of that. If it's a fault that can be fixed over time and doesn't present an immediate risk to the workforce, they can continue to use that piece of equipment. However, if it's a fault that states that it is no longer fit for use, that piece of equipment will not be allowed to be checked again until that has been resolved. The person that needs to be made aware of that will be notified, and that piece of equipment will be made safe and put out of harm's way. If anyone wants to do those inspections that has a phone but does not have the NFC capability, they can choose which checklist that they want to use. Really super smart, simple solution, which I've been enjoying watching these guys grow. They are absolutely killing it in the construction retail sector and are now moving into manufacturing and broader construction sector. Awesome story, well worth checking these guys out. Once again, there is an NZHSP Conference 2019 special offer. There's a free 30-day trial. Again, no banking details required. Simply follow that link, which will take you directly to their contact. And if you reference the NZHSP Conference 2019, you're going to get extra special attention from them, and you may even get a direct call from myself or one of our team, and we will really make sure you get an incredible experience using this tool. So Checkmate, check them out. Awesome, amazing people. Okay. So, breaking the norm, this is what this conference is all about. This conference has been recorded from the beginning all the way through to the end of this presentation. We will make this available on the NZHSP website within the next day or two, and we will also insert below the video a series of additional resources, including from our friend Deanne Bowles, neuroscience of safety expert, her previous presentation and all of her slides, additional resources. You also have Jono Brent's slides. You also have Naomi Kemp's slides. We'll also insert some of the links and additional resources that we've referenced during this presentation. Oh, phew. So we've really thrown as much value and information as we possibly can to this. The last thing I will mention is, where are we? It's Tuesday. So on Thursday this week at 10 AM, if you're in the Canterbury region, tune in to 96.9 FM, that's the Plains FM radio channel. You'll hear the Health and Safety Unplugged radio show, which will be all about today's conference. We'll be talking about the highlights, the links, my thoughts on how it's all gone, and also some top advice about some of the latest news stories that have been hitting the headlines. Again, an incredible resource. We've interviewed lots and lots of people over the last year and a half. Be sure to check out Health and Safety Unplugged Facebook page, and also there will be a link on the NZHSP Facebook page too. Okay, right, so the last few important messages, and then we'll start to wrap things up. So again, I really want to say a big thank you to our general sponsors, building networks, anything to do with building regulations, building code of practice and law in simple, understandable language. Rosie Killip and her team are doing an outstanding job, well worth checking them out. I'm a big supporter of building networks and what they're doing with e-learning, live conferences, workshop training. I've seen them in action and I can't recommend them enough. Obviously, advanced safety, I won't talk too much about that because obviously that's my business. I'm very, very proud of it. To be in a position to take the time to offer these resources, this information and training back to my broader community is a real privilege, and I'm so pleased that I took the decision 3 years ago to go out by myself to be able to do this. I'm really excited about the future. Next year is going to be a banger. Max People, people recruitment here in Canterbury, experts in providing really superstar team members within the construction and civil engineering sector. Really well worth checking those guys out if you need anyone or any resources within this region. Been a real pleasure to watch them grow. Very much same with Fleetpin. If you're looking for GPS tracking, fleet management, these guys are the people to talk to. I'm fortunate enough to share an office space with them, and watching them grow from strength to strength has been a real privilege. And finally, the Forklift Association. These guys are at the forefront of improving the culture when it comes to using forklifts in the places of work. Unfortunately, forklifts continue to be one of the key harmers within the place of work, particularly within the manufacturing and logistics industries. And these guys are really trying to make a big difference. Again, well worth checking them out. And obviously, to our principal sponsors, thank you all so much. KSI Limited, exterior cladding and flashing experts. Can't say enough about them. I love them. Basically, I've watched them grow over the last 3 or 4 years. They are really pushing the boundaries of what's possible in exterior cladding. Clever Medkits, who's supported and sponsored our pre-conference event. These guys are really cool. Basically, Smart First Aid Systems is the name of the main company behind this. They've created a first aid kit that is electronic and smart. You open that first aid kit, it will take a time and date snapshot and photo of the person removing the item of equipment from that first aid kit. It not only does that, it will take a stock electronically of what has been removed. Once that stock gets to a particular threshold, it will then notify the middle management team member and ask them if they want that to be refreshed. They click yes, and a third party will come in and replenish that first aid kit. It also has a dashboard to notify you of the injury types that have been recorded based on the types of equipment that's been removed from the first aid kit. So you've got low-level scratches, cuts, minor abrasions, minor burns. All of that information is all of a sudden being collated electronically, and you have a record of what's being used and taken. Super exciting stuff. Well worth checking those guys out. Safe 365, really just disrupting the health and safety world. From assessment, diagnosing, benchmarking, through to improvement, road mapping, through to how your traditional health and safety consultant operates. These guys have just blown it apart. If you thought Xero was challenging the financial world, just wait to see what Safe 365 does. If you haven't tapped into them already, be sure to check them out. Very much the same with Sign. These guys are going global. They started off in Adelaide in Australia and now taking the world by storm, hitting North America really hard in the last 6 months. All about signing in, inductions, contractor management. It also has a really nice knock-on effect around identifying the role types within your business. It generates a great conversation piece around who is responsible for what within your middle management structure. By defining that and getting that caught and captured within your electronic reporting saves you a ton of time and headaches when it comes to who's responsible for what, who's going to induct who, and also being confident that you know who is in the place of work when it really hits the fan. Also to learn about, these guys have gone, taking a bit of a back step at the moment. They are on the forefront of live electronic learning. Watch this space. 2020 is going to be a massive year for these guys. They launched early this year, have taken a whole bunch of feedback and learnings, and just watch this space. And finally, our good friends at Checkmate. If you're looking to manage your mobile fleet and equipment, or your static equipment such as racking and such as high-risk plant and equipment that needs routine checking, these guys are the people to check out. So massive thank you to all of them. All right, so last few minutes. And most importantly is you guys, okay? So ultimately, I set this up, I will say I now, I set this up just over 3 years ago, just under 3 years ago. I did this because I knew it was the right thing to do. I saw a gap where there were clearly individuals and groups of people within our profession, both within the health, safety, and broader health and safety occupational profession really, that really needed a hub or a space to talk freely, to openly, proactively ask questions, to get beyond simply turning up to events to be talked at, to, let's just face it, death by PowerPoint presentations, to instead have an engaging, safe place to converse over a cup of coffee, over a donut. For those that were at last year's conference, may remember Tim Allred's wonderful presentation about not being a donut and being a croissant instead. And that's exactly what this is all about, to be open if we are in a group, to ensure that there is a space that will then allow and accept new people to join, to celebrate new people. If you are members and users of the Facebook group, you will know every few days we make a real effort to acknowledge our new members. It's so important and critical, something that's been lacking for so many years, and I think has been one of the key reasons why we've just grown from strength to strength. So I welcome as many of you as possible to get on board with that steering group. I welcome as many of you as possible to get to a local group meeting if you can. If you want to be part of a group meeting but you don't see any within your local area, feel free to organise one. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. You can either do that yourself independently within the Facebook group, or you can reach out to me via direct message or via the group and ask for me to set one up. I'll be more than happy to do that. Last but not least, if you've got a burning question or issue, feel free to send me a personal message via LinkedIn, Facebook, email, text message, phone call, whatever. I'm very happy to table that anonymously on any of the various media platforms that we have. I've done it in the past with a lot of success. I'd be very happy to do it again in the future. Phew. All right, team. So with a few minutes to spare, lastly, is just a big thank you to you all. Thank you to all of those that have managed to step through this from the beginning. For those of you that have managed to drop in and out, awesome. I'm really pleased that at least we've given you that opportunity to do so. And as mentioned before, this has been live on the Facebook page. It's also been recorded from start to finish and will be available soon on the NZHSP website. So I hope to see some of you in person in the near future. I also hope to hear from you all via messaging or however you want to get in touch. And I guess finally, I will no doubt see you on the Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups. So until then, have an amazing week. Have an incredible end of year. I hope it's not too crazy for you. And I look forward to 2020. Let's see where the steering group and let's see where this takes us.